Good evening. This is the Tuesday, April 25th, 2023, regular meeting of the Flemington Borough Planning Board. This meeting is called pursuant to the provisions of the Open Public Meetings Act. Both adequate and electronic notice of this meeting has been provided by way of publication in Hunterdon County Democratic Courier News newspapers on or about January 18th, 2023. In addition, notice of the meeting was posted on the door of the Borough of Flemington Municipal Building here at 38 Park Avenue and any handicap accessible entrances there too. Posted on the municipal website, provided to the municipal clerk, and distributed to all persons of any requesting copies of the same. This meeting is being recorded with both audio and video and may be broadcast. This meeting is a judicial proceeding. Any questions or comments must be limited to the issues that are relevant to what the board may legally consider in reaching a decision, and decorum appropriate to a judicial hearing must be maintained at all times. I'll ask everyone please rise as you are able for the flag salute. Pledge of allegiance to
The flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mayor Kara? Here. Mrs. Engelhardt? Here. Mr. Campion?
Here.
Mr. Joshua?
here.
Mr. Levitt?
Here.
Mr. Cook?
Here.
Ms. Giffen? Here. Ms. Weitzman?
Here.
Mr. Hill?
Here.
Mr. Semino?
Here.
Mr. Eckel?
Here.
Mr. Weintraub?
Here.
Mr. Show?
Here.
Ms. Kaczynski? Here. Mr. Carrico?
Here.
Ms. McManus? Here. Mr. Troutman?
Here.
This is
Thank you. First item on the agenda, as always, is a period for public comments for items not currently in front of the board. If you'd like to recognize, please raise your hand. If you're online, click on raise hand. Please come forward and state your name.
Good evening. My name is Betsy Driver. I'm a resident of Flemington Borough. Mr. Cook, this is directed at you. Last night at council meeting, you asked about the status of some certain redevelopment areas, and you were given wrong information. I don't know if it's a deliberate lie or if the mayor is having short-term memory loss. After all, to get rather apoplectic at the last meeting of council last year in 2022. When we passed a redevelopment agreement for the Captiva project, she stated last night that Captiva, the redeveloper, walked away over negotiations on the pilot. That is not true. They did not walk away. Had they walked away, we would not have passed a redevelopment agreement at that meeting. And if they had walked away, this is on the mayor at this time, but that did not happen under my watch. And I would like that record to be corrected. And just so you know that they did not walk away. And regardless of what you said last night, it's not true. Thank you. Have a great meeting.
Thank you. Other members of the public wishing to speak? Not seeing any, we'll move on. Item 2 on the agenda, mayor comments.
Yeah, I guess I'll respond to that. That is the information that was given by our business administrator because I was not elected last year. And my understanding as of today and this morning, when I got a call from a new attorney for a new potential investor in the site, is that we have not heard from them because there has been some internal strife within the corporation, and they are working on trying to get back to the table. So if I had this information, it's because I was given this information. I take great exception at being called a liar. So especially by Ms. Driver. That's my only thing I can say.
Thank you. Council comment?
Thank you. The only thing I wanted to report is that the council last night introduced an ordinance 2023-16, which we will be hearing
Not tonight.
later tonight.
Nope.
Oh, okay. Well, we have to respond as a planning board by the 8th.
We have 35 days.
Oh, we have 35 days legally to respond. You're correct.
We do, and as yet, Eileen, has the acting clerk told you that this has passed?
No, the last communication I had from the acting clerk was Friday before the council meeting.
So until such time as we are notified upon the introduction and first reading, we are not scheduling our discussion for inconsistency. It's not on tonight's agenda. If we are notified of that, it'll be put on the next agenda.
Okay, I stand corrected. I apologize if I missed some emails this afternoon.
In other words, no emails.
Okay. Okay, right. I meant, like
Yep.
from anybody, with the updated agenda or anything. Okay, I do apologize. There was an ordinance introduced last night, ordinance 2023-16. And basically it is a proposal to repeal a previous ordinance that was passed in 2020-2 concerning the area south of Route 12. So yes, you are correct. I stand corrected, Mr. Chairman. We have 35 days to review that. And I would assume we'll see it on our next agenda, assuming that it gets sent over from the clerk. That is my whole report.
Thank you. Item 4.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Good.
Could I just ask one question, especially since we had a member of the public ask? I don't know about you guys, but I get asked almost on a daily basis, what's going on with our areas in need of redevelopment. So maybe that could be part of either
I can give a
your
report on that.
report or
Sure.
I don't know where it comes from.
Gave us a brief report on each area in need of redevelopment yesterday. I'm sorry, I could have easily added.
Yeah, I'm
that.
not asking, you don't have to do it now. I was just meant as a regular piece, so it's almost like
Sure,
you know when you know that every meeting you're gonna have to report on it.
Yeah. No, it's a good idea. But so the mayor did give a brief kind of update on each redevelopment area. Actually, it sounds like something developed today on Captiva, so I'll just let her comment stand for that. The Liberty Village Subcommittee met last week. She reported that at the meeting last night. I can't divulge what was stated. We did get an update in the executive session. That was on the agenda last night. So I can say that they definitely got a lot accomplished. I thought that the update that the mayor gave during executive session to the council last night was actually very thorough. So I was very appreciative of that update. Of course, the Union Hotel is the third area in need of redevelopment, and that one's moving along. And we're getting regular updates about construction, with road closures or whatever are going on, but that one seems to be going smoothly. And I'm going to apologize and turn to the mayor for the capital update, because honestly, I don't remember if you mentioned that one last night or not.
Cardinal?
The Cardinal one, I'm sorry.
So I didn't because there was no news, but
Okay,
I heard
that's
from,
why I didn't
I heard
remember.
from them this morning as well, and they are working on a new design that will be more. Currently, their design is like it's a 90% enclosed park surrounded by apartments or townhouses. And the park is supposed to be public, and it's not warm and welcoming at all because it's got a very narrow opening. So they're back trying to make that feel more welcoming to the community, as well as taking another look at the train depot, because there is apparently some, what I was told is some grant money available through the train people. And to help move that, and what else with that? And one of the big problems is that the two redevelopment agreements, Captiva calls for a payment of $200,000 and Cardinal calls for a payment of $250,000 towards infrastructure improvements down in that area of North Main. And the estimate from our DPW on the improvements that are needed is over $1 million. It is a major issue. So we're also talking about that. So that the taxpayers aren't, a redevelopment should be paying for you know, the infrastructure improvements that are going to benefit them. So. And that's where that's at. I'm hoping to talk to them the second week of May, maybe, Liberty Village, we're trying to find a new date. It's very hard because it's a very big team. It's very hard to find a date. So, we're working on it.
Thank you. Great. Item 4 on the agenda, HPC comments. Dennis, do you have anything to add?
The meeting last week got canceled, so the only thing I have is just a reminder. The house tour on Saturday, June 3rd from 11 to 5. We are having a volunteer meeting at the corner store on Wednesday, May 3rd at 7 p.m. So if anyone wants to come out, we are looking for volunteers. That's it, and the tickets are on sale at Eventbrite.
Thanks, Dennis. Item 5 on our agenda tonight is approval of our minutes from the April 18th, 2023 meeting. Those have been circulated by email. Can I get a motion and second on the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Any corrections, clarifications, or discussion on the minutes? Any?
Mayor Carroll.
Yeah.
Mr. Cook.
Yes.
Mrs. Engelhardt.
Yes.
Mr. Campion.
Yes.
Mr. Dashna.
Yes.
Mr. Levitt.
Yes.
Ms. Giffen.
Yes.
Ms. Weitzman
yes,
and Mr. Hill.
Jim,
You would have to abstain.
Yes.
you're abstaining? Was he abstaining?
I'm not sure.
No, Jim was at the meeting.
He was, yeah.
Yeah, he was there. All right, we're going slightly out of order because the public hearing is a D variance, so we want to be able to do other items before our class 1 and 3 members have to recuse themselves. So item 6 on the agenda is resolution adopting the changes of our bylaws that we talked about in detail over the last several meetings. Clean copy was circulated to everybody. Kara, has anyone given you any other updates, suggestions, corrections?
No.
All right, so I'm looking for someone to move and to second the changes that were circulated.
Engelhardt moves.
Is there any discussion on the bylaws changes?
Mrs. Engelhardt.
Yes.
Ms. Giffen.
Yes.
Mayor Carroll.
Yes.
Mr. Campion.
Yes.
Mr. Dashna.
Yes.
Mr. Levitt.
Yes.
Mr. Cook.
Yes.
Ms. Weitzman
yes,
and Mr. Hill.
Jim?
Yes,
Okay.
didn't hear my name.
Sorry. Thank you. Just in terms of chair items, before we let other folks go. Our next meeting is on May 9th. We have just Mr. Grimberg, we were just chatting, he's very optimistic. I suspect that we will not get through everything for this pending, for the application in front of us tonight, but we'll see how that goes. So we'll probably have a continuation for that one. Are there any other applications, Eileen?
No, not for the night.
Okay, we'll have updates from our subcommittees as well, right? We'll see where things are at. Any other chair items? I'm putting this out on the record that I will not be here for the second meeting in May.
Right.
23rd.
Third. We did get an application for Douglas Stryker, that was circulated. After discussions with the chairman and board professionals, it's recommended that we're going to put that on for completeness for the 23rd, May 28th.
Anything else? All right, bills were sent around earlier today. Can I get a one bill, sorry. Singular, not plural. Can I get a motion on the bills?
Engelhardt moves.
Second.
Mrs. Engelhardt,
Yes.
Mr. Cook,
Yes.
Mayor Carroll,
Yes.
Mr. Campion,
Yes.
Mr. Dashna,
Yes.
Mr. Levitt,
Yes.
Ms. Giffen,
Yes.
Ms. Weitzman,
yes,
Mr. Hill.
Yes.
All right, we usually do professional reports at the end, but is there anything that needs reporting on before we excuse the class 1 and 3 members?
Part of their subcommittee, but other than that.
Let's, is it, do we need to talk about the subcommittee
We don't
tonight?
need to talk about it. I can give an update. It's all.
Let's hold that till
We're
next
having
meeting.
a meeting
Yeah.
this Thursday, so. if you want,
Yeah,
it's-
let's hold that till the next meeting then.
that's all I've got.
All right. All right, so we'll move on to item 10 on our agenda, which is the public hearing for BSB Flemington Apartments LLC, lot 39, lots 3 and 4, preliminary and final site plan, D variances, bulk variances, waivers, and the lot merger before. We're gonna let you get set up there. I'm going to I'm gonna promote the laptop there to panelists. So Mr. Member, you can just click on yes over there. The mayor's leave, just on that laptop, you should click.
I already did, but you want me to move over here?
Good night.
Just turn the camera on, click on start video, zoom there. Don't leave it muted, the microphone. should go. You're gonna have a witness anyway, so you don't have to, I would say that whoever's talking, you're fine there. Slightly lower a little bit, but it's okay. Before we begin the public hearing, Kara, can we check for conflicts?
Is there anyone on this board that has any direct or indirect pecuniary or other personal interest that they feel may impede their ability to render a decision in this matter in an unbiased fashion?
All right, so
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Stephen Gruenberg, attorney in Flemington, on behalf of the applicant BSD Flemington Apartments LLC. This is the first hearing of our application for B1 use variance relief and other relief that we've requested. We're actually scheduled before the board at another meeting earlier. We received the board's professionals correspondence, reviewed our notice, we re-noticed for this evening. And we've attempted to address a lot of the concerns that were raised by the board's professionals to be able to discuss with you tonight. We also, at a completeness determination, heard Lois Stewart had some comments, so we amended our plans to present some comments to address Ms. Stewart's concerns as well. But this, so I asked if the jurisdiction could be confirmed for this evening.
Yes, from that everything has been properly noticed and published, and the notice seems to be in order, so the board does have jurisdiction this evening to act in their capacity as Board of Justice.
Some members of the board may, thank you. Some members of the board may recall this application because you granted it in 2017 for use variance relief and floor area ratio variance relief and height variance relief and other bulk variances for the Spice Factory. And the borough's been hearing projects and proposals for the Spice Factory, my understanding, for many, many years. Well, you actually have an applicant now that's working on the Spice Factory, has bought the project and is working on it and building it. It's gonna happen, and it's an exciting thing for the borough. We're here tonight technically for use variance relief, but we're tweaking the original plan that has already been approved by the board. We had previously approved 2 phases for the project. Phase 1 is the existing Spice Factory building, and phase 2 is a new building to be constructed on site. We're actually not touching phase 1. Phase 1 is being constructed right now. The demolition is taking place inside, and construction activities are actually taking place. So that's being built. It's very exciting. Phase 1 and phase 2 received preliminary and final approval. So they're technically that project can proceed forward, but we want to do something that improves on phase 2. It actually has 13 more units for phase 2 with additional parking. But that will result in 2 additional affordable units for the borough. The units will be nicer. They'll be more attractive. And we have an architect tonight who will present to you our plans to show what the building is going to look like. And it's overall a better plan than what was previously granted by the board. In fact, in terms of our floor area ratio, by adding lot 4 to the project and demolishing that structure, we provide access to Broad Street, which is something that the board had actually wanted us to provide for in terms of the neighboring property owner as a future thing and a possibility for the future. Mr. Nusser will show that on his plans, but we're doing it now on property that we purchased in order to make it happen. It actually results in a reduction in floor area ratio. So the floor area ratio variance previously granted was 0.73. Now we're down to 0.657. The height of both structures stays the same, but technically that needs a new D6 variance relief. And there's some other variants as well. I have 3 witnesses this evening. Eli Yanay is the applicant. Representative from the applicant. Christopher Nusser is going to be our engineer and planner. But what I'd like to do is first call him as our engineer. And then I'll present my 3rd witness, Alan Zimbler, who's our licensed architect. And then hopefully, because I'm an optimistic person, we get to Mr. Nusser to present his planning testimony afterwards. So with that, I don't know if you want to call all 3 witnesses at once or do them one at a time.
We can swear everybody in now and then we'll qualify. Their
You swear the testimony you're about to give this board is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do. Mr. Yanay, if you would please come forward. And you are a principal of BSD Flemington Apartments LLC?
Robert, could you spell his name for the record?
Yenay.
First name Eli, E-L-I.
Thank you so much.
And when did you purchase the properties?
About a year ago,
And what was your purpose in purchasing the property?
developing as a developer, this is what we do. So,
The prior approval was solely as to lot 3, correct?
yeah,
And lot 4, what is on lot 4?
so currently it's a vacant house. It previously had tenants when we purchased it that moved out. Dilapidated, rundown, interior. I don't think it's livable at this point. We proceeded with the demolition permits, shut-offs, cut-offs for the services, and are ready to utilize that as additional access point to the project. Adding parking and allowing us to make the units larger, more marketable, more attractive product. And that was the idea going into this.
So when you purchased lot 3, you were looking for ways of incorporating another property to improve the project, correct?
Correct.
And did that in fact include discussions with the owner of 112, 114 Broad Street from Mr. Zimmerman?
Yes, it did.
And did those negotiations prove fruitful?
No, we couldn't come to terms. We had some back and forth. But we tried.
Okay, and that actually ended up resulting in your purchase of lot 4 in order to be able to accomplish your purpose.
Correct. The intent is always to come in and add value here in a way that we can make the project look better and be a better product.
So the hours of operation for the commercial uses in the Spice Factory and the Powerhouse building is one of the questions that board professionals ask. What are generally those hours of operation?
They're typical business hours, 9 to 5. The larger tenant, the Regus, is like a shared office similar to WeWork. So people come into some single offices, but after 5 o'clock, it's pretty much empty.
So the phase 1 is, what's the current status of phase 1, which is the existing Spice Factory building?
So we finished the demolition in the interior of the building. The mason is putting his finishing touches on closing off the holes left from the HVAC units on the roof. The elevator shaft, making it more usable for our new elevator that's coming in. He's doing all the windows. All the mason work should be completed this week, and then lumber arrives sometime next week. So we begin framing.
In other words, this project is being built right now, correct?
Correct, yes. We've also removed the HVAC units from the roof, but at the same time had to provide heating and cooling for the tenant, the existing tenant. So that was a bit of a challenge, but we got that squared away. We put ductless splits units for the tenant, existing tenant down below. And then we're able to remove the, I think it was 6 rooftop units. Again, in a way that doesn't disturb the operating businesses.
And that's to add the additional stories to the Spice Factory
Correct.
building as has been previously approved.
Correct.
So this isn't just something that you're proposing before the board as a concept. This is something that is actively being built and it's your intention to build.
Correct.
The phase 2 was for the construction of a new building, correct?
Yes.
And what were your considerations in terms of amending that plan?
So we had a few concerns. The units were under 400 square feet, a little under 400. They're micro units. We felt that that wasn't a marketable product for Flemington. And after doing some research and study, we came to the decision that we needed to make the units larger. And the only way to do that is acquire additional land. So we picked up the 116 Broad Street, which added parking and in return gave us larger units, and an additional 13 units as a result, with some more affordable units as well. And we added amenities into the building, a mailroom, package room, bike room, and so on and so forth. The amenities will be used by all the tenants on the property, including tenants on the building, to the existing structure.
Yeah, so I want to slow down just a little bit in terms of the amenities for building 3, which is the new building. We're going to call that building 3. What are the amenities that are going to be included for the tenants?
So we have the pocket park in the front on the property, as we know. That is for all the tenants as well. We have the library and meeting room in the new building, fitness center. Again, a little gym. Package rooms, key fobs for the doors, green roof. As you saw in the plan. All in all, it's a beautiful project, in my humble opinion.
And the Spice Factory building, which is building 2, that will also have certain amenities for just those tenants in there, which is just the postal area, correct?
Correct.
But the residents of building 2 will be able to use the amenities throughout the site, including for building 3, correct?
Yes, that's the plan.
But there will be a package room for building 2.
Yes, separate package and mailroom.
So some of the initial comments from the board professionals included that there were concerned that there was some debris on site. When we got that notice, what did we do?
Sure, so we cleaned it up the following day. We are constantly maintaining the property. We put 13 cameras on site. There seems to have been, prior to my time, a lot of dumping that's going on in the back portion of the property. We lit that up and, like I said, put the cameras there. We did have some communication with the local police, I think 2 or 3 times, just kind of sharing numbers. If there's anything that ever is suspicious in that area, we helped out with our camera use. In one instance, not long ago, about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So there's communication, we cleaned it up, we fixed the fence that has been breached. I guess the kids sometimes cut through to the bullpark through there or whatnot. Yeah, there's been a lot of neglect in that area. We're trying to do our best to keep it in order.
And that included repairing portions of the fence, the existing fence.
Correct.
That were requested to be repaired, correct?
That was just, yes.
In preparation for this evening, we had contact from the neighboring property owner, Mr. Zimmerman, for concerns regarding potential for parking on his property, correct?
Yes,
And we're willing, there is an existing fence that covers, that Mr. Nutter will show, that is in between both of the properties to some extent, correct?
yes,
But in order to address those concerns, we're willing to extend that wooden board-on-board fence along the entirety of the property line between your property and Mr. Zimmerman's property, correct?
that is correct.
And that would be a 6-foot high board-on-board fence, right?
Continuing the same fence that's existing till the end of the property.
to the end of both property lines.
Okay, so the
correct?
setbacks required, but yeah,
Right,
as far as we can go.
correct. And Mr. Nusser will reflect that on a plan. That's how we propose to address any concerns regardless of what other demands have been requested of you, correct?
Yes, correct. Let me just add, the cameras are in that area as well. We are getting in 2 additional cameras, specifically for the 116 board angle and for that finger portion of the lot. So every square inch of the property with 15 cameras is covered. And we're maintaining and trying to do the best we can.
All I have for Mr. Yannick.
So our, those who are familiar, our processes, we have questions from our board's professionals, questions from the board members, and then questions from members of the public for each witness who gives testimony. So I'll start with our board professionals. No question. Jay, Bob,
No question.
Beth?
I don't have any questions, except I just want to clarify the testimony. You're talking about the fence that's to be extended. Is that for block 39, lot 3.01, the office is directly adjacent?
Yes.
That's all.
Karen, do you have any questions?
No.
Members of the board, questions on the testimony given by Mr. Yanay? Anybody remote with questions? I'm sorry, Count, please. Sorry, please.
I just wanted to touch on something you said at the beginning of your testimony, about the property currently on lot 4. You mentioned that it was dilapidated.
Yes.
At what point was it dilapidated when you bought it?
It was to a certain extent.
Because there were people living in it, so it wasn't, you said it was inhabitable, because people living in it when you bought it, is that correct?
Yes, in my opinion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Within the 4 years you owned it, did you do any
I've only owned
maintenance
it
on
for
it?
1 year.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know why I got flushed.
Okay.
Sorry, in the period that you've owned it, did you do any maintenance? Because I'm surprised why it's suddenly.
The tenants moved out shortly after I purchased it. They moved out maybe 2-3 months after I purchased it. So
I maybe it's a good time for me to address that. Because I know the APC had done the memo with respect to.
Just asking a question about when it was dilapidated. From his testimony, he said it was dilapidated.
Okay, I'm happy to address the status of that structure and what our intentions are.
Well, you've already issued, you've already received, you've already sold and received.
I'm sorry,
Is
I
that correct?
didn't
Is
hear
it
you.
correct that you? Can you give testimony to the demolition permit you've already sought and been given for that property?
Yeah, and I just, respectfully, that structure is not in the historic district. It's our intention, and always has been our intention to demolish that structure and respectfully, whatever happens, it's going to be demolished one way or the other, because we're going to need that for staging for phase 1 of our project. So, when I appear before this board, so when we had a demolition plan in our permit in our pocket and we started getting ready to demolish, and then I got the HPC letter, I wanted to respond to it and appear before this board without us tearing it down, so we could explain the situation to the board. But respectfully, the demo permit's been issued and we're gonna have to tear it down, and we want to tear it down. It's our legal right to tear it down.
Respectfully, I didn't mention that it was historic structures, so you raised that, I didn't raise that. So
Yeah.
just to make sure that's clear, I didn't mention that. But also, if I can just on this point, can I just maybe ask our professionals, is it normal procedure to seek a demolition permit before you come before a site plan review?
My experience is typically a demolition permit or any permit, not just demolition, are typically sought consistent with the approval.
Mhm.
That's typical, but I don't believe there's a requirement in the borough for otherwise.
That's what I was just wondering. I know there's probably nothing written, but what is normal procedure, what most applicants would do. I appreciate that input, thank you.
And legally, there's no permit one way or the other, so
Right.
we did those both of those, yeah.
Right, and legally, even though, with
Let's
response to your,
keep it as questions, we'll do discussion.
um,
Okay. So do you have other
No,
questions?
that's it.
Okay, okay.
If I may, now just maybe a good time since we're bringing this up, let's just mark a couple of general exhibits. Let's mark as A1, the application of supporting documentation. A2, the notice and publication proofs. We'll mark as PB1, Van Cleef Engineering Technical Report number 1 dated March 24, 2023. PB2, the board planners review letter dated March 23, 2023. We'll mark as PB3, the April 17, 2023 letter from the Environmental Commission for the borough. And PB4, we will mark the letter from the Farmington Historic Preservation Commission that was just referred to, prepared by John Hatch, and that's dated February 18, 2023. If there's other documentation, Mr. Goldberger letter you'd like to mark, replace those.
There was exhibits that were handed out today, right?
Well, I'm just looking at,
Jay,
comment.
Jay's got a letter.
PB5, yep, correct.
March 27th.
Thank you very much.
Dennis, I see your hand. I just, I'll get to you in just half a second. There were also exhibits that were circulated.
I want to wait to mark
When
those.
those, when those get introduced, right?
When they get introduced, and I just wanted to give Mr. Gruberg the opportunity if he wanted to mark his response letter or anything.
Right,
of that nature.
with my response letter to the HPC correspondence, which was previously supplied, which is dated.
February 27th. And that'll be A3.
I think mine's February 3rd. Oh, no, you're right, February 27th. And I actually would like your correspondence marked.
Mark that as PB6, and that would be my
3/21/23 correspondence.
correct, my correspondence dated 3/21/23.
Thank you.
Got all everything marked,
I have a marking, I just have one.
please.
I was gonna leave this for another witness, this might be better for you. I have, in my memo, I have a number of affordable housing comments, and I think some of those are gonna be for your other witnesses, but just. On general compliance, did you have a chance to take a look at those? Do you have any objections to the proper deed restrictions, the phasing, the administration that was set forth in the memo?
I think it's safe to say that we'll comply with whatever affordable housing requirements there are. There are no objections.
Thank you, that's all.
Okay, Dennis, you had a hand up, you've got questions.
Yeah, I just had a question on lot number 4. My question is, was any consideration given or calculations done to determine how many parking spaces you would give up if the house wasn't demolished or if it was subdivided, given that the house was built in the late 1800s?
Yeah, I'm gonna let Mr. Nusser respond to that because it's more of an engineering issue.
Okay.
But I know the answer, but I think it'd be better coming from a witness.
Okay, thank you.
So Dennis, if he doesn't address in his testimony, make sure you ask it again.
Okay.
All right, other questions for Mr. Yanay on testimony given? Any members of the public with questions? If you're. You could just come forward, identify yourself, use that microphone, so
Pull it out or?
yeah, you can make it taller, you don't have to squat down. Not sure why it was all the way down there, but. There we go.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the board. My name is John Kaplan. I'm an attorney at Harold Law in Warren Township, New Jersey, here on behalf of 114 Broad Street. So I have a few questions for the developer.
Mr. Kaplan, if I can ask who you represent here this evening?
114 Broad Street LLC.
Okay, and the members of that LLC?
Mr. Zimmerman, Harold, and I believe members of his family.
Okay, since the municipal land use law requires that all of your clients pose their questions through you.
Yes.
If there's anyone, I believe Mr. Zimmerman's here, if there's anyone else from his family, I'd like to know just who they are, so that we make sure we don't repeat. Testimony questions and everything is put through you.
Understandable. I believe he's the only one here.
Thank you. If also after this hearing, you could give us a list of everyone that is part of that LLC for future applications or for future meetings, I should say. Just so we make it clear as to exactly.
No problem.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry if I said this wrong, Mr. Yanni,
You know,
you said you purchased this property a year ago. And we're here this evening to amend essentially this application. You wanted to better the application to make the units larger and add more parking to make this better, correct?
yes.
Can you just explain for my edification how removing an entire floor of parking and adding 13 additional housing units betters this application? I can understand the parking, you were deficient previously. So you've added parking, made the units larger. But how is adding extra units and decreasing parking in the building make this a better project?
Making the units larger makes it a rentable
Yeah, I understand.
project. So
Trying to
let
answer your
me try to answer here. In order to make the units larger, we need additional parking. So we acquired the additional land to be able to go back and make the units larger. In return, we get a better product. And that was my intent in testimony, saying that we wanted to make this a better product because I knew that 300 square foot units are going to be very difficult to rent out in this area.
It's understandable. But again, you eliminated an entire floor of parking and added 13 residential units. So I'm just asking how that is bettering this project.
Well, let's hope on the calculation and get the larger units.
Can you explain that calculation? I don't know what calculation you're referring to,
Larger square footage for the units specifically
but the additional units.
and the existing,
Okay, but the addition of units, how is that making this project better?
making them larger.
It's,
Look, that's my opinion though.
I don't equate larger units to additional units. That's where I'm disconnecting here.
It's both at the same time,
Okay, so the additional units, how is that making the project better?
so I can rent them out, they're attractive.
Okay. Now you said you cleared up the debris on the site. Is that all of it? Did you clean everything? No piles of beer cans, liquor bottles on the property?
So I have a property manager, who's there on a weekly and bi-weekly basis for lawn and maintenance. We're on top of it to the best of our ability. If there's something there specific that you're aware of, please point it out, we'll address it.
Well, there's a pile of beer cans that appear very dirty and very old, but I'm not testifying. So, the Regis units. You said they closed pretty much at 5. You have a shared parking situation going on, residential, commercial. What does pretty much at 5 mean? Or is it going to actually close at 5?
I can explain. So basically, these are individual offices. People can come back when they want, but typically people work 9 to 5 there. So pretty much it's 5 o'clock. There may be some exceptions. People can come in after that or stay a little bit long.
So basically,
These are
they're
individual
free,
offices, basically. It's like a WeWork sharing office setup.
but they're free to stay open as long as they want, correct?
Correct, but typically 9 to 5 is the usage hours.
And I just want one clarification about the fence in between your property and 114 Brook. You said you're gonna extend that? So you're gonna keep what's there and just extend it, you're gonna replace the whole thing and do that whole corner?
There's an existing fence and we could continue it till the end of the property lines on both ends.
Okay, I'm just clarifying, you're gonna
Yes,
extend
that's
it,
what we
not
said.
replace what's there.
Correct.
Okay. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you. Other questions from members of the public? Okay, seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Nuster, please. I'm going to qualify Mr. Nuster both as an engineer and a planner now, but he's only going to give engineering testimony at this point, if that's okay.
That's fine.
Man of many houses.
So I'm gonna say there's no.
Let's hold and ask you.
Yes, where to put it? We want it to be on camera.
Yes.
Those are exhibits. Those are not part of the initial submission, right? These are
Correct.
drawings.
was part of the, it's an exhibit.
So I would say if you can put it not there, what I'm trying to hope is if we can grab it on the camera that's mounted on the top of that. Yeah, so if you could put it somewhere, yeah, so that it can be seen. Do you have a digital, well, I'm gonna ask you, do you have a digital version of those or no?
So.
Okay, so you digital, we could put it on the laptop and it'd be, and everyone can see it on the screens, but that's okay, so.
You sent them, but I think he's thinking about a thumb drive.
If you had a thumb drive, we could put them on, we could use the laptop.
They are on, they're on the website, but
I don't
think
wanna
it's
unnecessarily delay the hearing here, so let's just, what's it? I need to, it needs to be seen, we've got members of our board who are remote, and so we need to be able to see them. So,
And that's what they.
well, yeah, if you look where it says public meeting.
Oh,
So
yes.
if you could rotate counterclockwise, there you go, move more back and turn and stop. Yes, the problem is that the people in the room can't see a camera.
Can we?
We're gonna use a different camera then. If you could please move it then to.
You want to put it behind myself?
Uh-huh, that's what I was gonna suggest.
Do you need something to elevate that?
We
I
might.
don't know, well, it's still gonna be an issue for. The public, they're gonna be looking back.
Yeah, this is the joy of a hybrid meeting. I'm not if I'm the best way to do this.
Is there,
Can somebody?
because this was.
Yeah.
If it was
submitted.
on,
Are you able to?
if it was on the submission, we could, that's on, what was it, on that machine, we can connect to the website and you can share a screen off of that laptop, and that way everyone, not only will the remote participants can see it, but it'll be projected on some screens so everyone can see it. But if you've got new material, we have a problem.
The plan that was submitted today was that put on there? Did you, the one I sent digitally on Friday?
Did you circulate that?
I did circulate that,
So it might, we might have a digital version of it somewhere. So,
I think I had the couple of exhibits that were.
Yeah, it was the one.
I think they were put into the.
So-
website.
if someone have a thumb drive, we can, thanks. So we'll get it that way, so that way it'll be a little bit easier.
You have any first?
Yeah.
That'll solve.
It'll solve all of our problems, and I'd say for future,
We'll
we'll figure out the rest of it.
we'll get to.
We'll get through, we get there. Yeah. Oh, it's a negative.
I mean, I can share my screen.
That's got it over here, so we're gonna get it in a second, so
That's
we're,
better idea.
just give us half a beat here, we'll map. Actually, you know what, while she's doing that, let's qualify you, let's do that, we'll get the exhibits in a second.
Mr. Nuss, will you give the board the benefit of your qualifications?
I am a licensed professional engineer and planner in the state of New Jersey. Those licenses are in good standing. I graduated from Rutgers University in 2006 with a bachelor's of science in civil engineering. I have been practicing land use engineering since before graduating. I have appeared before over 70 boards in the state of New Jersey, including this one, in those capacities.
You're a licensed professional engineer,
Yes,
And a licensed professional.
and planner.
just make sure we have that on the top. Make sure we've got that on.
I led with that one.
That was sorry. All right,
He's pretty about the exhibits.
I'm just, I got flummoxed. Any objection from our professionals or board members to the qualifications of the planner and engineer? Okay, so I think we have,
On the exhibits, I have the Spice Factory site exhibit.
Yeah,
It's not an aerial. It's yeah, it's not an aerial.
is it on, is that the one from today is the second one? The first one is from the submission, right?
what was the?
The one
An
from
easy
today.
question, what's the title block on that one? If that's the FBA, then,
Yeah.
yeah, then that's the new one. The other one's on, now the other one's definitely on the website because it's part of the
Okay.
submission package.
Oh, okay, all right.
So we'll get there.
So what we're looking at right now, over there, that was part of the submission.
February
Yeah,
20th.
yes, so that does not need to be marked as.
Does not need to be
That's
marked?
part of A1.
But we do need to get it projected, so we're gonna
Right.
pause and do that.
Oh, I thought they were.
That's two background education, which is.
Okay, quick hotspot. There we go. Let's do this.
You could, yeah, you could navigate to the website if you wanted to.
Use that now.
So
And there.
I didn't download it. So among the, I have a Spice Factory exhibit and I have a Spice Factory 3042.
That's the building, yeah, I think that's the architectural.
Is one of these should be the,
I have this one.
Okay,
Grab it
so,
off the website.
so you have it on the website?
I think the only one
Under
that
the
would be-
February submission.
If you have to have a DA plan on the drive, that would.
Chris?
you know, I'm gonna give you my, yeah.
No, I have the one and.
So you should now be able to share screen. Happy birthday. All right, that is what you intend to show, right?
Yes, that was the.
Perfect.
And that doesn't need to be marked because.
It's not, it's part of the initial submission. So let's start with our testimony here, and then when we get to the other one, that's got it on top.
Thank you.
And if you don't need to have this on the screen, you can also stop sharing, but we know it works, so.
I was trying to go full screen here.
This is, yeah, this is fine.
Okay.
If you add the other one into the OneDrive,
Then you
it
can
can
grab
be
it.
shared
Oh, that's-
as well.
Yeah, but I don't know if we've got access.
Okay.
Well, it's email, right?
No, but I post on OneDrive.
Oh,
It's-
just the phone.
You know, no, I hear you. It's good.
Oh. Yours are even the ones that were submitted, or you must even yours.
Yeah,
Yes.
we should have it.
Could you, sorry. Yes, I will
Only
take
if
that
this
first.
is what you want.
Yeah, the architectural is also.
Yeah,
The architecture should be on the website also, right?
he has some exhibits that we also sent in.
Yeah, but I think they're on the website.
Anything that was submitted on the 21st was.
Yeah,
posted on the
there's
website.
a folder there for the 21st.
Yeah.
Oh. So then.
Let's just go with this one and then we'll get.
So what if he doesn't vote?
First.
Yeah. I know, but it's like-
You know, it's
This is why I was optimistic.
I mean, I just knew we were doing this.
You gotta be optimistic.
So it was already pushed. But thank you.
Yes, it's only Tuesday, but I've been on this board since 2006.
All right. Mr. Nasser, why don't you orient the board?
Okay, so I apologize, I'm looking down on the screen here.
Quite all right.
And doing some pointing, so I guess my laser pointer is not gonna do me too much good tonight. So the site here, as we're looking at the exhibit, which again is site plan with an aerial underlay, so we can see the surrounding features. On the left side of the page, which is south, north being right on the sheet. So on the south side, we have Church Street. On the west, we have Broad located here. We have the rail line running on a diagonal here from southwest to northeast. North of the site, you have the lawn here that is supposed to be cut glass. And on the other side of the railroad tracks, we have the park and ball fields to the northeast of our site. To east of our site, we have one, the American Tire and Auto. My mouse is keeping up with my mouth. And then in front of that, we have the bank. Across Church Street, we have
Walgreens, the shopping center, which has liquor store, the Italian restaurant, you have the urgent care. And then coming back around, we have next to us here on the corner of Church and Broad, the Herman Cap building, which is senior housing. You can see on the plan here, the existing Spice Factory building located in the southern portion of the property, with the powerhouse building located north of that. That building, the powerhouse building, has the salon in it. And again, the Regis office being the first floor of the existing Spice Factory. Just to recap, because I know not everybody was on board when we did this first time around. I know Mr. Grunberg gave a description of phase one. I just want to walk through very quickly what that is, so the board is just fully aware of it. So phase one is the addition to the existing Spice Factory building. It's currently a 3-story building that is approximately 50 feet tall. The addition is 2 stories on top of that building, bringing it to the 5-story building. That has a proposed height of 64 feet 4 inches, which again was approved at the prior hearing. As part of phase one, there's a couple of improvements that are going to happen as part of this phase. The first part of that was along the frontage, the sidewalk has some issues with meeting ADA code. It has a bit of a cross slope to it that needs to be corrected, so that's being fixed. Between the Spice Factory building, which is referred to as building 2 in the plans, and the powerhouse building, which is labeled as building 1, there is a new trash enclosure that will service the entire development, but will be built out as part of phase 1. Additionally, there are upgrades to the stormwater management system. Currently, the property has 2 basins on it. One basin is located between Church and the Spice Factory building. That will remain unchanged. There's a second basin, which is located where I'm indicating here, kind of on the western arm of the property. There's an existing basin. The basin needs a little bit of TLC, we'll say. Maybe a lot of TLC. As part of the application, and as part of phase 1, the basin will be converted from being just a standard detention basin to being a bioretention basin. So at the request of the board, as part of the prior approval, we added the element of the bioretention into the basin. So the soil media will be replaced and plantings will go into that space to provide additional water quality treatment as part of the project. So really that's phase 1 in a nutshell. It's pretty straightforward. What's part of it?
Phase 1 has received preliminary and final site plan approval and is being built right now.
That's correct. Yep. So phase 2, as we talked about, had been previously approved. It was approved with a building generally in the same location as we are proposing now, building 3, which is this tan kind of L shape here on the eastern portion of the property. The building had understory parking on it, and lot 4, which is located here on the western portion of the property on Broad Street, was not included at that time. So, seeing as how Steve's optimistic on this evening, and I don't want to belabor things too much, things you've already heard. I'll skip a little bit of things that have already been talked about, and if you want to ask me questions, I am very happy to answer them. So the proposal involves reconfiguring the parking lot around building 3, just in general. The pocket park, which was previously proposed along Church Street, as I'm indicating here, remains as it was previously proposed. It's a small vegetated area with, there are pavers in the middle with benches. It's a place for people to go outside, sit, relax. It's not active recreation. Obviously, we have the park next door if somebody wants to do something a little more active. The extension of the parking to the north towards the railroad tracks, also that will remain. The other main component is.
We just back up on that just a little bit. You said that extension to the parking lot towards the railroad track.
Yes.
Is going to remain. That's part of the approval for, that was previously granted. by the
Yes,
board.
yes, that was previously approved as part of phase 2. It needs to be constructed before any building construction happens on phase 2, but it was part of phase 2. And it is proposed identically to how it was previously approved. The major change being the removal of the understory parking from building 3, as we discussed, and the installation of parking along lot 4 to bring us out to Broad Street. I know we had a question from board members, so I'll just address it now, so none of us forget about how many parking spaces we could fit if we were to leave the house and we do that calculation. I did not specifically perform that calculation. Given where the location of the house is and where the existing parking lot terminates. Because the existing parking lot terminates here on the northern side of the property because the basin is to the south of it. And the house is equally on the northern side. We would end up with very few parking spaces by the time we made our turns, and then exited out onto Broad Street. And quite frankly, I haven't even looked at it. I mean, there's a driveway there now. It's fairly tight to the house. I haven't checked it specifically, but my opinion is it'd be very difficult to widen the driveway out to be two-way traffic along the side of the house and then provide parking in that area.
And the goal here is to be, one of the goals there was to be able to provide access to Broad Street, which had been a consideration of the board in the past as a future planning situation.
Yes, well, and it is, as I'm sure the board members are more than aware, interconnection between the lots is, especially non-single family lots in the borough, is something that you strive for at all times. We have that connection to the east, to the bank and the American Tire. There is cross access for vehicles and pedestrians. For traffic, for movement of people, not parking. Make that very clear. So that connection already exists. As it is, our driveway is an entry and an exit. The driveway off of Church to the adjacent parking lot is actually only an entrance, so they have to use the exit from our site to get out unless they want to take down and hop onto 31 behind the old pharmacy.
But it's fair to say that one of the benefits of this improved plan is that we're able to provide access and traffic circulation directly to Broad Street.
Yes.
In fact, on the prior plan, it's not reflected on this exhibit, but has there been a requirement that we carve out a potential access to the parking area on the office lot?
Yes, and that still remains on the plan. So there is, per the board's request, because it is in the ordinance, there is a potential future access location located here onto lot 3.01 in the event that it becomes viable in the future to provide additional connectivity between the properties.
But since that purchase of that lot wasn't successful, we're able to provide access to Broad Street directly from lot 4, which we have purchased.
Correct. So, from there, I don't want to get too much deeper. I want to talk a little bit about parking and traffic, because I know that's what is a concern. However, I'm going to switch to A4, it would be. Everybody was
A4, correct? You can just give us the title, who prepared it, and the
What did you mark your letter?
Six.
Thank you.
Okay. That small letter, so cheap. So this plan is titled Site Plan Exhibit for Spice Factory. It is dated 4/20/23. It was prepared by French and Fellow Associates under my direction, and I signed it.
Thank you.
So as Mr. Grunberg stated earlier, after the last meeting, we got comments from your professionals in advance of that meeting, and we tried to make as good a use of time as we could, and met with your professionals to address concerns within their memorandums and, you know, methods on how we could change the plan to satisfy them. One of those was on the site access. So the concern of the board last time, or one of the principal concerns of the board last time, was the distance of parking to the buildings and how far people would have to travel. And Mr. Clarico raised in his report a concern of safety for people traveling from the western parking lot, being page up here as well. There's a parking lot behind the proposed spaces, but it didn't continue down past the detention basin and connected to the sidewalks to the rest of the site. So upon the discussion, we kicked around a couple of ideas and ultimately went with Mr. Clarico's suggestion that we look to relocate the wall of the basin. So it's going to move about 2-3 feet into the basin, so we'll have to make some amendment to that. And removing the guardrail that's in place now and putting in bollards along there so people can get onto the sidewalk, and then putting in a sidewalk that'll allow people to walk from Broad Street, because it connects all the way up to Broad Street, down into the sidewalks that already exist for the site.
So not only are we providing vehicular access to Broad Street, now we're providing a sidewalk that can connect to Broad Street for pedestrian access.
That's correct. And similarly, where we did not have any sidewalk access to the northern parking area, so page right here, we've added a sidewalk to the northern side, sorry, the western side of the parking lot, from the top of the parking down to this aisle here that takes you to the western section, which then crosses and again connects into the existing sidewalk that are on the site.
So previously, when this was approved, sidewalk there wasn't required, correct?
Yeah, there was no sidewalk that was proposed or required in that location.
But that was a comment that had been raised by the board's professionals, and we're happy to add a sidewalk even in that area as well.
for pedestrian traffic or pedestrian travel.
Yes, yes, and again, it just helps to provide more additional safe pathways for people to get to the building from those various parking areas, making those more accessible, those areas. On this plan, we did a couple of other items, a couple other improvements in here. One was we added a couple of speed bumps. One at this parking island, the westernmost parking island. And then one right in this location. Here, right where the western and northern parking lots come together. The idea there just to slow people down. When parking lots dead end, people aren't going to be necessarily going quickly, but concern of people maybe trying to shoot through the broad street a little too quickly. We added in those speed bumps. Another comment that Mr. Clerico had in his report that we addressed with this was the placement of the electric vehicle charging stations. They have been relocated, so they are to the north of the building and then along the eastern side of the northern parking lot. So those spaces don't conflict with any of the sidewalks throughout the site. And we also adjusted the number to make sure that it was the correct number. So there's 39 electric vehicle parking spaces proposed as part of the project. I note that those are not exclusive to electric vehicles. There's no requirement that they be done so and be so they're exclusive to electric vehicles, but they will be there and available to them. Finally, on here, we made some changes to the landscaping, which is maybe a little ahead of ourselves, at least me being ahead of myself. We endeavored to add additional trees around the perimeter of the parking lot to get closer to the requirements for the number of trees per parking space on the site. Because I still can't read it. We've increased the number of parking lot trees to 66, where we had 63 before, getting us close, not quite to the 69 that's required. We did previously have relief in that regard from providing all of the trees. And part of the relief that was granted was planting trees within the detention basin, which again, we converted to being a bioretention basin, and that would continue. And then
That would what? I'm sorry.
continue. So the last thing is right along Broad Street. And this was the comment from Ms. Stewart, who is not here tonight, which is unfortunate because I wanted to make her day. Along Broad Street, the comment, and it was reflected in your professional letters as well, was to provide some sort of an edge along there to not make it just a parking lot dumping out onto Broad Street, but provide some sort of visual interest. And just knowing what Broad Street looks like, probably more to the north than right in this vicinity, there's a lot of walls. There's a lot of like old stone walls along Broad Street. And so trying to pick up some of the character of that and setting an edge along the street, or proposing is putting in a stone landscape wall along the road, backfill soil behind it, so it'll stick up out of the ground, planting shrubs and flowering trees behind the wall, again, to add visual interest and set an edge. No signage associated with the sites proposed as part of it, but just a landscaping feature in that location. So parking and traffic. As part of the prior application, there was a traffic study that was prepared. We submitted that study with a supplemental letter. As the project is generally the same, although we're adding in 13 additional residential units, so we corrected for those additional residential units. The result is that we have an additional 9 peak hour trips over what was previously approved as part of that. So a fairly de minimis increase. That doesn't include what would be generated from the house on lot 4. So that number of 9 additional is more conservative. And as Mr. Troutman noted in his report, the newer versions of the traffic generation manual have actually lowered the trip generation for multifamily houses. So the 9 additional trips truly is a more conservative number than what the current guidance and documentation exists.
So in layman's terms, what is the impact of an additional peak hours or if any?
There isn't, and part of that is because we are providing that access onto Broad Street. So where in the prior application, we had gone through a gap analysis where the traffic engineer had documented the ability of people to pull out onto Church Street to make sure so you could understand that there was gaps for people to enter and that they wouldn't get trapped in the site for an inordinately long period of time. Not only do we still have this access onto Church, we have an alternative exit onto Broad Street where people can come onto Broad. They can come out to the light on Church and be metered back into the flow of traffic in that direction. So more options, more alternatives, and an improvement to the flow of traffic.
Is it a better traffic plan than what was previously approved by the board?
In my opinion, yes. So as it relates to parking, I'm going to spout numbers, so I apologize. Please stop me if you want to stop me. So for parking, the required spaces per your ordinance is 256 spaces. Well, documented all of our plan. We're providing the electrical vehicle parking spaces, which reduces our required number of spaces to 231 spaces. We are providing 206 physical spaces on the property. So we have a 25 space deficiency per your ordinance on the site. The prior approval had a 32 space deficiency on the site. So this would be an improvement over what the prior approval did as it relates to compliance with the ordinance. As part of the prior approval, and it was included, there was a shared parking analysis that was provided for the development. When you take that study and you extrapolate into how many parking spaces would be required with these 13 additional units, peak parking demand is 151 spaces. So with shared parking, as it was calculated, the same manner that was calculated and accepted previously before the board, the peak parking demand is 151 spaces. Where again, we're providing 206. If we said that we had so looking at, sorry, if I wanted to look for a standard that you could ground yourselves in and understand that better, something that the borough has looked at previously. I looked at the Union Hotel redevelopment zone standards. Obviously, we're not in that zone, but it provides for shared parking. It provides for very similar, it has apartments in it. So very similar use type for the residential. And the standard that was adopted for that is instead of the normal 1.8 spaces per unit for a 1-bedroom and 2 for a 2-bedroom and 2.1 spaces per unit for a 3-bedroom. What was adopted in that ordinance was 1.3 for a 1-bedroom, 1.5 for a 2-bedroom, and 1.8 for a 3-bedroom. If we calculate based on that, we have 156 residential spaces required. So maybe slightly higher than what the shared parking analysis shows overall for that. But still significantly less than the 211 spaces that are currently required for the residential. So if you take those 156 spaces and you add in the commercial office uses onto the site, back in the numbers that we have in here already, we have a demand for 200 total spaces, where we're providing 206 spaces on the site.
Sorry, can you just say that once more?
Yes.
There's a demand for what, and you're providing 206?
There's the demand, if you were using the Union Hotel redevelopment for residential and the commercial retail that is shown on here, we add those together, we're at 200
So the,
spaces.
so the commercial requires 44.
Yes,
And the residential is 1.
correct.
Right, okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question on the commercial calculation?
Yeah.
Well, before, we wanna. Sorry. But no, we usually give the testimony the question, so let him finish testimony and then follow up. We'll come, I know Jay will get to it, I just wanna.
I see him writing it down, so. So that would put us at 200 total with 206 provided, and again, that's 206 physical spaces. That's not 206 with the EVs counting for 2 or something like that, just physically 206 spaces on the site. I would also note that the Union Hotel redevelopment ordinance, which you guys know, I'm sure far better than me, allows for shared parking and has adjustment factors. So the 200 spaces is with no adjustment factors in that, the way that ordinance allows. There's no, at this time of day, this only counts for 77%. That this is using those numbers for peak demands for the residential. So overall, it's my opinion, as it was previously, that we have sufficient parking on this site for what we're proposing in access. The shared parking analysis showing that we have a demand for 151. And your own ordinances, again, not specific to this, but recognizing that for this type of land use in this day and age, that a more appropriate parking demand would be that 1.3, 1.5, 1.8. So, no matter how you kind of parse it in those spaces, going off of some more real world data as opposed to what I would deem outdated numbers that are included within the RSIS standards. We're going to provide adequate parking on this site. I would note, and this is for planner hat later, that your ordinance acknowledges and encourages a shared parking approach. In not just Union Hotel redevelopment ordinance, but in the ordinance. So the other concern being the distance that these spaces are from the buildings. So the furthest spaces are about 550 feet from the rear entrance to building 3. is about another 100 feet to the door on building 2. On an average walking pace of 3 miles an hour, which is on the lower end of average for people, it's a 2-minute walk. It's not an excessive time period for somebody to walk. Is it further than is typical in the borough? Yes, we certainly acknowledge that. Is it too far for somebody to walk? I don't believe it is. I think it's reasonable. I think, you know, I've looked around and I was at Pets Market and food for my dog over here in Raritan, and they have the new apartments that they put in there. And I looked at that and said, that's kind of strange. And as I looked at the building, you know, it has really analogous setup to it. It has kind of an L-shaped building, entrances in the middle of the L. There's not a lot of parking right in front of it, and a lot of the parking is off to the end, down to the east towards the Walmart. And so a lot of parking for that is at probably about, it is about an equal distance from where we are. See plenty of people parked there. So it is not as convenient, certainly, as having the parking right there. But that is ultimately a bit of a market factor in how much a unit can be rented for. And if somebody's going to decide to rent a unit here, you know, are they?
Let's show where the previously approved parking areas were. Through the cursor.
Sure. So previously, the only parking that did not exist previously is this parking, this gray hatched area to the west, towards Broad Street. This parking here, this gray hatched area to the north along the railroad tracks, that was proposed. And that's about the same distance as this now proposed western area is.
So that gray hatched area along the ball field there, that was previously approved.
Yes, it was.
And so the distance that, let me back up that. The area towards Broad Street, what part of that parking area was previously approved?
Well, it's all the previously existing parking that's there now. So all of this white unhatched parking exists. It's the gray beyond there to the west that would be added.
Okay, and that is roughly the same distance, maybe a little bit longer than the previously approved parking area along the ball field, correct?
It is, and then again, we've added the sidewalks to this to interconnect everything, to provide better connectivity to both of these parking areas where previously, you know, we did not have a dedicated walking path out to these, you know, any of this parking on the northern end. As we had done previously, and as continues here, we have denoted on the plans in front of building 3, kind of across from the entrance to building 2. There's 2 parking spaces that are designated for short-term parking. Basically, for somebody to come drop something off. You go to the grocery store, you got a bunch of bags, you use the 15-minute parking, you can bring your stuff up, and then you can go park your car. And then that way, if you do have a bunch of groceries, you have a place to park that's close to get your things inside. You're not gonna block traffic or park in the aisle to unload your stuff. And you're not gonna have to walk that stuff in from, you know, one of the further areas from the site. So it's a convenience for everybody that would be a tenant in the building. It adds, again, a bit of safety factor to it that somebody's not gonna just decide to beach their car and double park. And you know, makes everybody's life a little bit easier and helps offset the distance that parking is from the building. One of the other things well, there's two things that we discussed. And first, we discussed last time, which was dedicated parking. Were we gonna dedicate any parking to any of the units? And because it's shared parking, you know, we don't want to dedicate parking specifically to any of the units, residential units. One of the concerns would be, you know, where would we dedicate those stalls to begin with? The commercial tenants are gonna be pretty upset if we dedicate all the spaces right next to the building and next to them for residential parking and leaving their customers to walk the distance that they otherwise wouldn't have to in a shared parking arrangement. And in that case, we're then dedicating out further spaces to residential tenants. We're then gonna wanna park in a closer space if it is available. So a dedicated parking arrangement, in this case, we didn't feel was appropriate for the site. We didn't feel it was appropriate last time. It was not part of the approval then, and we're not proposing it here either. The other consideration we made was the reverse of that, which would be to post signage for the commercial spaces to dedicate a number of spaces for them in their vicinity for their parking during their normal business hours, 9 to 5. So then that way, the businesses have some dedicated parking close to their doors to make it easier for people that are using those facilities to get into them. But once 5 o'clock hits, it opens them back up to the residential tenants. And you know, as they're coming home from work, they can park in those spaces. So we think that's a very workable way to address you know, dedicating and or not dedicating, but having a shared parking arrangement work in everybody's interests. I think, you know, from an enforcement mechanism, if you will, it's something for the applicant to address. It's something that he would include within his leases. That, you know, you can't park in these areas during a certain time. And I think additionally, which is something we spoke about at the previous hearing, and it is a comment in Mr. Clerico's memo, would be that within people's leases, they would be shown where they could park. Because the concern being that we have the bank and American Tire and Auto to the east of us and their parking spaces, and we certainly don't want our tenants parking on their property. And we have cross access for pedestrians and cross access for vehicles, but we don't have cross parking between the uses. So within the confines of that and those restrictions, it's not like we can throw a fence up like you might do traditionally and say like, oh, you can't park over here. By the easement, we can't stop people from walking over there and we can't stop people from driving over there. You know, we can't put a physical barrier to keep people from parking over there. But what we can do is to work with those owners to make sure that there isn't an issue that arises, and to make sure that within the lease itself that tenants are educated on where they can and cannot park.
We can have frontage as well along the property boundaries between the new building and the American Tire and Auto dealing with parking.
We could put parking on our property along the property line signage, sorry, yes, signage, thank you. Signage along the property line, which is probably about 10 feet or so from the parking spaces. Saying that, you know, no parking for them only. Certainly, and you know, if they, I don't know if you're gonna kick me, but if they were to entertain it, we can certainly work with them to put it behind their spaces. But I think what we're able to say tonight is we can put it on our property, right? We can sign it that says, parking for American Tire Auto on the back only. And that way, it's at least signed, tenants are educated. Tenants are obviously educated, their guests aren't necessarily educated. So before I get that question, that's what the signage comes in for, that, they'd be restricted against that. That was parking.
Before we move off parking, yes, it's sort of related to the parking. Can you show the board where the existing fencing between lot 3 and the neighboring property owner of the office building?
Yes, so that fence begins approximately where this set of parking spaces right here on the southern end of these parking spaces. If everybody can see where I'm indicating, and it's not jumping around too heavily, and extends south to the property corner, and then again it comes to the west behind the existing building.
Now that existing building there, what does it consist of as it faces lot 3 and lot 4?
So as it faces lots 3 and lot 4, because again, the fence goes up kind of to the property line and then turns and comes behind or between lots 3 and 4. So as it faces those lots, there's no windows on that side. It's a 1-story masonry building. There are doors exiting out that side, and there are mechanical units in that area. So like AC condensers, but there's no windows that face within that.
So even though that building essentially blocks our proposed parking area, and the existing fence blocks a good portion of our existing and proposed parking area, we're willing to extend that wooden fence along our property line. Can you show the board where it goes there?
Sure. So yes, I think as it relates to the concern that the owner of that lot has, I think this is a very simple way for us to correct that issue, is to extend the fence from where it ends here on their eastern property boundary up to the northern end of the property, where it gets to the railroad. And then again, extending it along their southern boundary. And I'm going to look to Beth and say, how far forward can the fence, can it extend? I would say we would extend it to the front yard setback line, which is approximately here, right before the
I think
last space. Because I would assume the ordinance says none in the front yard
I would think it does, and
at that height.
that it's always important what the ordinance says, but regardless what it says, I would not want it to extend beyond the limits of those parking spaces.
Well, and I guess that,
Participants that the board will need to evaluate the frontage, but I would need to see you diminish the effect of the frontage you're trying to create along Broad Street.
I certainly wouldn't want to extend it any further than the parking spaces. I honestly would prefer for the symmetry of it to extend it to the end of the parking and not stop one space short, because I think it would look a little odd. But it's the ordinance. Well, I guess it would be, we would extend it to that point so far as we're allowed, or the board grants us relief to be able to do that.
I can take a look at the ordinance.
Take a look at the ordinance. I mean, at some point, you're gonna propose what you want to do, and whether it requires relief or not, it will be something for the board to grant or not.
And is that 6-foot high wooden fence that would extend along the vast majority of the property line between the two properties adequately deter people from wanting to park on that lot and try to get onto our site?
Yes, I would Yes, 100%. So we talked about site, we talked about parking. Let's talk previous coverage briefly. Just as it relates to compliance. And so the plan, and carried as amended here in A4, it does have a little bit of extra impervious coverage that we've added some sidewalk to the site. So we would be proposing 60.54%, where previously we were proposing 58.85. The ordinance allows 70% coverage, and then if you cannot meet. I'm going to use Mr. Clarko's letter here. If you cannot meet the provisions of the ordinance, then it is reduced to 50%. The provisions of that ordinance that would. I always have trouble effectuating how that exactly works. It's just a little counterintuitive to my, at least in my mind, how it works. So you're allowed 70%, and if you do not meet the green infrastructure requirements, then you are brought down to 20. You're brought down 20% to 50%. That includes in your stormwater management providing for bioretention, which is something that we included within the basin last time as part of our compliance with that requirement. And the other being pervious pavement, which is how we're proposing to address the stormwater in the additional parking area, in the western parking area on the what is currently lot 4. So in my opinion, based on what we had approved previously and what we're adding today and how we're adding it, we're adding this additional parking section, and we are doing it with porous pavement. We are meeting the conditions of the requirement so as to not have the 20% reduction. So the standard for this property would be 70%, and we are at 60.54. Thank you. We would comply.
And that went up a little bit just because of the addition of the sidewalks that were suggested by the works professionals.
Correct. So moving along, from a grading perspective on the lot 3 portion of the project, the previously proposed section of the project, we're maintaining how it was previously proposed. The water is being collected within the existing drainage system and being directed to the basins just as it was previously. For lot 4, the lot currently grades towards lot 3 and also partially towards the Herman Cap buildings. That generally continues. As I mentioned, we would have porous pavement for the parking lot, which would infiltrate. Poor choice of words because there's no infiltration. We went through this last time, which would infiltrate the water into the stone bed below the parking lot, discharging it into the municipal system on Broad. So ultimately, we have the stormwater for the additional parking on lot 4 is being handled kind of as its own separate entity from what was previously done, mostly separating them. So that they are separate systems. Then let's touch on landscape and lighting. The landscaping as was proposed continued the theme of what we had previously approved as part of the prior approval. Again, we made adjustments within this plan here, A4, to add additional trees. There are more trees here, as more density of them to the south of the western parking lot, as well as more trees being added in around the perimeter of the northern parking lot, where that was possible. We have an extensive foundation planting plan around the proposed building 3, as well as we mentioned before, the pocket park and the detailed landscaping that is within that space. From a lighting perspective, the lighting as proposed was continuing to use, as we had in the prior approval, fixtures that are out there. So a number of the fixtures that are there are maintaining their same location, same fixture. We were leaving them as they are. And then the new fixtures, we're going to match those in the same exact style. So it'd be the same fixtures just throughout the site. It's a historic looking, I should say, lantern style fixture. Those are okay. So they're metal halide fixtures.
So that was what was previously approved that we were seeking to continue to use, correct?
Yes.
And that was to give more of a historic feel to the parking area.
Yes, and because those fixtures were again previously approved on the site, they exist on the site, they fit within the way the development looks on the site, and the aesthetic, we were just continuing to use those fixtures that again can continue with that same aesthetic.
There's been a question, I think, raised by the Environmental Commission about whether those fixtures should be changed somehow and not be the historic one. Give comment with respect to that.
Well, I think certainly the style of fixture is appropriate for the borough and for the development itself. That their comment is, and I'm looking at their April 17th letter, it's comment number 4. They're asking for the lights to be reevaluated. I think one of the things as it relates to the Environmental Commission is you're balancing a couple of things in here. We're balancing the lights that are there, the impacts from the lights, which again, they're on the site today, and they work quite well with placing those lights and ultimately the waste that's generated from them. So if we replace the lights, now we have a bunch of trash that we're throwing out and we're replacing these fixtures. So there is a balance to be made in here. Ultimately I think the lighting is appropriate, lighting meets standards.
And it's essentially the same that previously.
Right, and we're continuing with what was approved when the site was built and what was approved with this application the previous time. And then just to touch briefly then on utilities, we are in a borough. We do have public water, public sewer. I did hear back from the Terrence, technically the township or the borough engineer from. So,
Terry Boyd,
yeah,
yes, he's the borough engineer.
okay. So I heard from the borough engineer this afternoon as I was leaving the office, that we do have, because it is a concern in Mr. Clarko's letter, that we do have water and sewer is available for our development. So that does exist. I don't have really anything formal because this was at 4 o'clock today, but I just wanted to make sure that we that I put on the record for you that I did hear back from them. We had submitted our Form A. And I think it got lost in the shuffle of the change of engineers.
It actually submitted it last June, correct?
Yes, we submitted it last June. And we were working through issues with them on phase 1. And we had concluded our phase 1 issues with them, and we hadn't gotten a response back on phase 2. So again, we were following up, and I think it was just a coordination between kind of trying to figure out where things were. So we have the response back, and obviously, you know, we continue to work with them as we have already, and you know, to make sure that everything's in order and that the site is to their standards.
Anything else from an engineering standpoint?
I don't believe so.
Do you want to go through Mr. Clerico's letter?
Sure. I think it's,
To the extent that we haven't already.
So we can go through that. Usually the board takes a break at around 9, so it's 5 of, this feels like a logical place to break. Because I want to be able to give Mr. Clark the ability to follow up on questions, whatever, so.
Sure.
If we can do that, we're gonna take just a short break, and at about 8:54, so no later than 9:05. I gotta stretch my legs.
Did you want to pause it?
Yeah, sure. Okay, we are going to reconvene. It is 9:05. Eileen, for the record, can you please read the roll?
Well, I'm telling us that Mayor Carroll and Singlehart left is before this hearing began. Mr. Campion,
Here.
Mr. Dashna,
Here.
Mr. Levitt,
Here.
Mr. Cook,
Here.
Ms. Giffen,
Here.
Ms. Weitzman,
Here.
Mr. Hill. Let's see him, Mr. Semino,
Here.
Mr. Eckel,
Here.
Mr. Weintraub.
Here.
Mr. Show,
Here.
Ms. Kaczynski. There. Clerico.
Here.
Ms. McManus here, and Mr. Troutman.
Here.
And we will watch.
I'm gonna watch for Jim. Jim, if you can hear us, say hi.
Yeah, if we do anything without him,
Should
we can't.
I know, so we're gonna give him,
Yes,
I'm giving him just to have another minute. This is at 9:06 on the clock now. I know, this is because we're dealing with Board of Adjustment, I don't want to be very precise here.
Can someone text her?
If you keep saying Jim, I remember when I was late at the time, but because my computer in the attic, I heard you say Todd, and I went downstairs. I couldn't run fast enough to say, I'm here, I'm here.
Jim, are you here?
You
Bueller. Blank do economics. Mr. Hill, are you here?
Somebody have this?
I don't have it, I just checked.
We do it tonight.
Oh, you know what? I think I have it right here. Yeah, I did. I got it.
Bring the fire.
Jim, you're here. Jim is waving, he hears us. Okay, so we're back. All right, 9:07. All right, so what we're gonna do, probably be a little more efficient. I'm gonna ask our professionals to ask questions on the testimony given. And if there's anything that hasn't been covered in the review letters, we'll let those
If I could just make the comment on Mr. Clerico's letter,
If you want to add more, anything to the testimony, please feel free, yes.
I don't take exception to anything he's asking us to do within this letter.
Fine. So Jay, questions on engineering testimony?
Yes, my only questioning focuses around the retail parking calculation, just to confirm the existing retail user is the Legends Lawn and Spa.
Yes,
And so I had that as a retail space of 3743 square feet. And then in the parking calculation, it shows up as 2701 square feet.
yeah, the 3743 is carried from an old plan. And is not the correct footprint of that building, the 2701. I did go back and confirm that is the correct footprint of that building.
Okay. And then just, I see I see how the calculation works then, and I guess the question would be, has there ever been any observations of how much parking that actually generates when it's busiest, maybe on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday? I don't even know when it would be busiest, but
I mean, I could call my wife and ask her because she goes there, but I don't know that there has been any.
okay. Those
All
are my
right,
questions.
Jay's questions, Bob, questions on testimony?
Yes, there's obviously been a lot of the presentation has been a comparison. This is the new applications for the board, but there's obviously been a lot of comparison back to the application that was approved, or is approved. For this phase 2 building number 3. In your testimony, you indicated I believe you indicated the deficiency on the current plan is 25 cars. Based on your calculation.
On the current plan, yes.
Okay, and we're comparing that to a 36 deficiency on the prior plan.
32 on the prior.
32 on the prior.
Yeah.
Okay, 36.
Right.
The prior plan didn't have the EV calculation though. If you did the EV application on the prior plan, what would the deficiency be? Just to keep it apples to apples.
No, I think the better way to do it would be the reverse and to say the current, I mean, if you look at the current plan. Without the EV, the demand is 256, thank you. It's 256, so we'd be 50 spaces deficient in that case, not 25.
Okay, so comparison then, this plan has, under that set of equal comparison purposes, that this plan would have a deficiency of 50 what? 53 compared to
50.
50, thank you, compared to the prior plan of 32, you said?
We're still gonna check. Yeah, 32.
Okay.
Yes, and again, this. Refer back to my prior testimony and say that I feel that the federal amount of parking is sufficient for the proposed uses.
And I wasn't questioning that, it was just questioning the methodology of comparison. I know you indicated you would comply with your recommendations and of my report. One of my recommendations was to on this northerly parking lot to put a sidewalk on the east side of it, and then on the north side of the parking spaces that are off the north end of the building. I see you put it on the opposite side of the northerly parking lot, and I guess my question is, why did you do that? What advantage do you see of that over the suggestion? I was looking at that from the standpoint that really nobody's going to use that sidewalk. You'd have to walk to the west to go across the parking lot to it, and come around and walk back across, to the east to get across.
So the consideration for it was the topographical consideration of the eastern side. It rises up a bit there. And so it would be, you'd have to do a bit of earthwork in there, and the trees that exist in that space would get disturbed. So we would end up disturbing quite a bit to put that sidewalk in. And once that sidewalk comes down, in this location here, kind of where that other northern section you're talking about, and where the parking to the north of the building and then the northern parking area where they come together. This space is fairly narrow, so that if you were to put a sidewalk in there, I was concerned that with a combination of a vehicle overhang, you know, how do you connect that parking on the eastern side back across? You're yes, bringing it down the eastern side may look better, but then once you're down there, what are you doing with it? Was the concern. And on the western side, it's much more straightforward. You can bring it down, it comes right across. And there's a sidewalk on the other side that already exists. We'd have to, there's no ramp there, so we were gonna replace it and put a ramp in that location. So it was, you know, easier path to walk, but you're connecting right back to the sidewalk on that side, where the other side, you have this, you know, there's all these trees in here that we're trying to preserve because we're trying to keep the landscaping trees. How do we get a sidewalk from the eastern side to connect back to the sidewalk to the site? I mean, I can run it down the eastern side, but then it's just dead ended, or I'm removing trees. So I think that I don't disagree with you that the eastern side to the plan view, just looking at that would be better for that section. But once you look at the topographic consideration and you look on how you connect it back to the rest of the site, that's why we went with the western side.
Yeah, the concern, the reason I was raising that as a recommendation is that it seems to me that people are gonna basically be walking through the parking lot and through parking aisles in order to get to the, you know, the architect hasn't testified yet, but the access doors into this building are essentially in that interior corner of the building.
Yes.
And then there's other ones out there at the front, but there's really no parking spaces convenient to those particular doors. As far as tenant occupied, you know, parking space access to the building itself. It would seem to me there's, again, what existing trees are in there, what that situation is, have to look at in the field. It's not clear from the plan, the grade issue, or at least not from this, the grade issue that would be involved in that, but I just wanted to kind of, and we can discuss that in the board as part of the discussion of this, but it just seemed to me it would be what's being proposed here. It certainly looks nice. I don't think it'd get used by anybody. Honestly, I think it would be really kind of a waste of an improvement, really.
I don't know that I agree with that. I think, you know, certainly the people that are gonna park adjacent to it on the western side, I think are fairly likely.
Well, they
to
might,
use it.
yeah.
The eastern side, maybe a little bit less, but again, the problem is you put a parking lot or a sidewalk on the eastern side, you're gonna end up snaking. There's no good way to connect it back to the site. So then at some point, you're bringing people, yes, from the back of the parking lot to the front easily enough. But then we're either eliminating parking spots to provide crosswalks, or we're going through the existing islands, which are fairly narrow, and having to remove the trees within that space. And then still, once we get, say we came through that little hook here. And then we crossed into, say, this island, you know, then again, we're at a dead end. Or you're sending people to the west, and then it's the same concern that you have now, that people are they gonna use it? Or they're gonna use part of it, and then they're gonna start walking through.
We can defer to discussion and see what the board thinks in terms of what, I think that's something we could look at in terms of the layout and in the field. And if it's something that was really desired, you know, by the board as part of this thing, we can look to see how we can make that work. I agree that your response to saying using the existing aisles, it doesn't make any sense at all. That certainly doesn't make any sense. But I think there's a way maybe to adjust this plan. Again, if there was a desire on the part of the board to think that is an appropriate, because that is one of your design, you're addressing that design waiver by providing the sidewalk.
Yes.
You're doing it on the one side of the parking lot, which struck me as being not really beneficial to anybody, or not as beneficial as if you put it on the other side. The other,
I mean, I'm not tied to what this is. I thought this was best and most appropriate given all the site conditions.
No, my
As
question
always,
was
I'm always-
why you did it, you explained
Yeah.
why you did it, and I think that's a
Yeah.
point of discussion we could have with the board that.
Like I said, we're happy to discuss and, you know, if there's a solution that the board thinks is more appropriate, then, you know, I'm happy to defer.
We also, as I had also recommended that you'd have a crosswalk of the main aisle here going from where the building number one, the salon is, or what do they call it, tower building, I suppose. Crossing over to where your main entrance to the, and that's, if people are actually gonna be using the sidewalk, especially the one you are providing on the south side of the westerly parking lot. That's where everybody's gonna be crossing in there. It would seem to me that would be a more appropriate spot for a crosswalk of the parking area because it lines up directly with the building. That wasn't done as part of this sketch. I wonder if there's a reason for that.
No, and we can adjust the island that's in that parking set. So I don't believe, what's that, 6 spaces? So again, no, 7 and 2, so it's 9 and then 6 spaces. Again, trying to keep it even, but also stay within the 12 space limitation. I mean, we can move that island over a little bit.
I'm trying to limit my questions to your testimony, so we'll go into the report in a minute, but I was just trying to focus questions on the testimony that was given before.
Yeah, we can adjust for that. It's not-
And the other, I mean, you and Steve had touched on the one of the concerns we raised and the question of how you're going to enforce that the opposite closest parking to the access doors of this particular building are on the adjoining bank and tire center.
Well, the closest parking is on the site, but yes,
Well, the predominance of probably available parking is going to be on.
there's a lot of parking next door that is in close proximity to the.
Right, which, and your representation is you do everything you can to keep any of your tenants from parking in that particular.
Yeah, tenants and their guests.
Okay. Which occurred to me, then looking at the plan, why are we proposing a sidewalk then that would connect that
We have
parking
to-
with your front door?
It exists today.
No, it doesn't.
There's a sidewalk that runs through
It
there.
comes up and it goes out to Church Street. Doesn't go into the site. Again, something I think we should look at, you know, again, we're looking at this. And I think we need.
I mean, that's fine. I mean, I have no issue if everybody, if it's deemed to be appropriate to disconnect the sidewalk there. Again, we have the easement that says we cross, or there is the allowance for the cross access. I have no issue removing a section of sidewalk in front of the building there to disconnect
I
that.
think you said you had vehicular.
It's both pedestrian and.
Oh, I thought the testimony was that there
Oh, no, it's
was
both.
no pedestrian.
No, it's both. It's access for both specifically, but. Again, as it doesn't exist today,
But that's something that we can take a look at.
yeah, we can take a look at that and.
There's other questions, but they come from the report, not from the testimony, so.
So let me just make sure, Beth, do you have questions on the testimony?
Just quickly, one of the things that you testified to in regard to the exhibit shown on the screen, I forget what it is. A4 is that you're proposing, I think the testimony was a stone wall, landscape wall on Broad Street.
Yes,
What was the height of that, and was there a detail provided, or was that something?
no, we would certainly provide a detail, so that whoever the board would feel would be the appropriate person's satisfaction. You know, at least the image in my mind, for what's that's worth, spoken out, is that it would be have a stone look like the walls that exist elsewhere down Broad Street. So it kind of had that consistency throughout. I would expect the wall, it's not retaining anything. Except for soil that will place behind it. I'd expect it to be probably like 2.5 feet tall. And so it had some presence without becoming an issue.
And on the fence, I confirmed it's maximum height of 4 feet within the front yard area.
Okay.
And then 6 feet elsewhere. So if you keep if you proposing a 6-foot fence, it would be permitted beyond the front yard setback line. Behind the front yard setback line.
So it has to be 6 and then drop to 4.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, I think. Look weird to have one 4-foot section fence.
We'll take it to 6 feet up to the setback.
That's one way to go.
That's one way to go.
The other way to go is to extend it to the end of the parking area and ask for relief on, or what essentially being 9, a couple of feet.
9 foot by 2 foot.
Yeah,
space.
where being in the front yard, asking for relief on that. on that.
Then we would ask for that relief. If the board finds the extension of that fence to be a good idea and taking it to
End of the parking.
the end of the parking area would make sense.
Or couldn't go option 3, couldn't you grade from 6 foot, where you're allowed to have and grade down 4 and then 2 feet every fence and contract.
That is a third option.
Third grade it down,
That is a third option, and
go
We're gonna-
6 down,
Yep.
or something fancy.
And it's-
It still requires relief, but less.
No,
It
but
would require this was-
stop where it needs to stop,
But
and then
if
it
it
would.
graded
but they
down,
could
it'd still
grade-
be
they could-
Between the 4 and 6 would exceed the
Exactly.
maximum height of.
They
4
could
feet.
start the grading 2 feet back, so by the time they're
It
not
gets
allowed to
there
be
at
6,
4
it's
feet.
lower than 6.
Yes.
Variety of options.
I mean, not to do this and say, I mean, because it's our application,
Your
certainly.
application.
But I don't know that we have a strong preference in any direction on that. And be happy to take feedback and direction from the board in that regard.
Understood. The only reason why we're having any discussion right now is that some of these options require grant of variance and some of them don't.
Correct.
So it was simply a question of designing an architectural stone wall that we delegate to the satisfaction of the board's professionals. That's fine, but because we're talking about something that might require relief, we need to be a little bit more specific. So a bigger proposal and we'll.
It sounds like what might be acceptable and not require any relief is to do what Ms. Gibbon had suggested and do a 4 foot up to the end of that parking spot and up to the setback and then grade it up to 6 feet from there and make it look a little nicer. And we'd be happy to do
If
that.
that's the testimony, then it doesn't require relief.
As testimony.
All right, there we go. All right, Beth, other questions?
Those are the only questions I have in the testimony.
All right, Kara, do you have a question?
Really just clarification, the number of EV spaces, 39?
39.
And your testimony with regard to the removal of the wall of the basin, the guardrail removed in exchange for bollards, is all of that shown on A4?
Yes.
That's all I have.
Okay, so normally we would go to questions from the board and then questions from the public, but there is stuff that Mr. Clerico had wanted to go through this letter. So let's do that first because it might address questions that the public have. We'll ask questions, whatever you need to do, Bob.
Okay, well, just one, actually. Kara's question, I raised another question. I didn't get a chance to go back and look at the EV standard. On the EV standard, you're required to have 39. Is there a requirement, is there a requirement to only have one of those for an ADA accessible or a handicapped accessible space, or is there a standard for more than that?
From what I remember when I checked, there was no standard for more than that, but suffice to say, if there's a requirement that we have.
Okay.
More than comply with what we need to comply with. We'd likely comply on the spaces near the pocket park, if that was the case.
If you like, Mr. Chairman, or for the sake of expedience, the applicants indicated they're willing to comply, but it really more for the boards, this would be a recommendation to the board.
Yep.
For, feedback and that. So I mean, the report, again, it goes through the documentation that's received. You have 2 more, one exhibit here, the engineer that would be an update to supplement the stuff that was submitted. And we're gonna hear from the architect, there's a whole new submission of architectural stuff, which we haven't entered into the record yet. But again, I just went through the variance issues at the beginning of the report. I don't think I heard anything that contradicts. I have a little history of the prior approvals on the site. And the variance issues start on page 5 of the report. Again, I don't think I heard anything that was contradicting to that. You did hear testimony on the sidewalk extension along the westerly parking lot, which would, I believe, eliminate one of the previously requested design waiver release. We had a brief discussion about the northerly parking lot, whether the sidewalk should be on the west side of that or more appropriately on the east side, and then on the north side of the adjoining lot with access into the building. I think we need to have a discussion on pedestrian circulation at some point here. We heard about the height variance, we heard about I don't really heard anything yet, based on the record. I know you're gonna have planning testimony later, but there's also a setback variance associated with this building.
Yes,
Maybe I missed that in the testimony, but I noted in the report that the ordinance requires this building, the proposed building number 3, to be 15 feet off the property line, and it's in the prior, 25 feet off the property line. Again, if we're comparing it to the prior approval had compliance on that. This plan has a 12.5.
yeah, in the front. And it faces Church Street, it's at 15 feet and it's 12.53 in the rear, closer to the park, from the property line with a lot to the east, which is lot 13.
The variance would be for 12.53.
Correct.
From a 25 standard.
Yes.
We had the discussion about the parking efficiency and if you're calculating it the same way, there would be, well, you heard the response from the prior discussion. On the impervious coverage calculation, we heard the reference to section 2637C, which is it's not a stormwater provision of our ordinance, it's a land use provision that talks about having sites be designed more for the green infrastructure. It talks specifically about groundwater recharge. What I'm indicating in here is that the applicant is offering documentation, some of it to be documented yet, but that the soils here are such that under the stormwater rules, they would not have a requirement to do infiltration, because they're indicating that the soils are actually more impervious than soil maps would say. So they have to get that reclassification approved through the soil conservation district. So all I'm saying here on my comment on page 6 is that whole argument about what the impervious standard is under that section really hinges on whether they can get the district to accept that. And actually the stormwater design hinges on that as well.
Can I ask a question on that? Because the standard is asking us to provide, it's not asking us to provide the infiltration, it's asking us to provide those types of features. It's not specific to infiltrating, it's just providing those features, and those features are provided. You know, how it relates to the stormwater management and your comments related to that, again, you know, we'll certainly work through
Yeah, we
that.
have to deal with that issue one way or the other.
Right, but as it relates to compliance with the ordinance and the impervious coverage standard, whether or not the site infiltrates isn't part of that standard. It's just, are you doing pervious pavement? And we in fact are.
Okay, so you're taking exception to that one representation. I have to go back and look at the ordinance. You're taking exception to that representation under section 157.
I guess I am, yes.
Okay. So we have to go back and look at my recollection of the ordinance was written. That's why I stated it the way I did in 157 is that standard, in order for that standard to be avoided, they would have to, quite honestly, you have to get that through the district anyway. Your whole stormwater system is predicated on it. So it's kind of really a moot point. One way or the other.
Right, but the stormwater requirements are different than the impervious surface requirement, is what I'm hearing. Is that what you're saying?
That's
correct.
That's what your testimony is.
But they're basically saying they can't, they don't have an obligation under the stormwater criteria to do infiltration because they're saying the soil is not what the mapping says the soil is.
But the impervious coverage standard doesn't say we're infiltrating, it says that you have to use certain green techniques. In order to not get the 20% penalty on your impervious coverage. Requirement down to 50 from 70, and it lists out certain things. Which we, again, the bioretention for upgrading the one basin to bioretention. And doing porous pavement, which we're doing on the new pavement, so again, my opinion, the way the ordinance is written. And what we're in line with what the ordinance is permitted. Whether or not, you know, again, to the chairman's point, whether or not the stormwater is completely buttoned up. You know, obviously, there's some things that we need to clarify. We need to talk to soils and get them to sign that letter back, but per the ordinance, we're using the techniques that the ordinance prescribes to us to not get 20%.
But when everything is said and done, to get the stormwater approved, the way it's currently designed, in avoid infiltration, you're gonna need to get the soils reclassified.
Understood,
Okay.
But this is,
And all I'm
Get
saying
back
is, there, if you get that, then I would agree with you, you're exempt, whether you're exempt one way or the other under the section 2637, you're gonna need to get there.
okay, just back to the chairman's point
No,
about, is it a variance or is it not a variance?
Right, so I know, there are two related but distinct things here. One is, does the stormwater system work? The other one is, do they need variance relief on the impervious? And so they're giving us testimony at this piece about the impervious question.
Let's focus on the stormwater section in there for a second. They're gonna need to get this reclassification approved. And if they can't, they're gonna have to introduce infiltration into their design.
Which only helps in the design.
Correct, so all I'm saying, my interpretation of our switching over now to the other section of the ordinance. I thought infiltration was a requirement. And I'm saying here, the only way it wouldn't be a requirement is if they can, on the back over the stormwater side, they don't have to do infiltration. So you're gonna get there one way or the other. It's not gonna be a variance under this section because they're either gonna convince on the stormwater side, they don't have to do infiltration, or if they can't, they're gonna be doing infiltration.
Okay,
They're gonna revise the plan.
that's what I was just trying to make sure. we
I
have
think we're
clarification
seeing
on.
the same.
Yeah.
Where I was trying to help us.
Yeah. Sorry.
There were some other, again, I'm deferring to Beth when they hear the testimony and planning, but there was some other design waivers here about islands and buffers and tree plantings and lighting standards, which you heard some briefly on, and then the lack of sidewalk connectivity is the one item we were discussing. At some point, we've got to discuss that with the board, where the board's got to keep weigh in on those particular issues. We heard the testimony about the sidewalk, the layout, the distance of the this is item 2 now on page 6 of my report. About the distance, how it's somewhat unusual for the borough. You heard testimony from that. We heard testimony about the fact that they're not going to be assigning parking spaces here, except perhaps for the commercial space up front, was what I heard. Again, that should be a point of discussion by the board at some point. We had a lot of discussion about the access into building number 3 and the design waiver. And again, we had a whole discussion about the where you put the sidewalk for the northern parking lot. You put it on the east side and connect that adjoining thing with direct access to the building. They agreed to the relocation of the retaining wall on the basis so they can provide the sidewalk coming down on there, so they're actually complying with those particular recommendations on this concept plan. Obviously, the site plan has to be details associated with that have to be incorporated into the actual site plan. We had a lot of discussion about the EV parking spaces. They're addressing the issue of a conflict they previously had with the EV spaces for the sidewalk by putting them in areas where there are no existing sidewalks. Moving on to page 8. we didn't really hear much testimony about demo and staging, but they basically agreed to comply with those particular recommendations unless there's something the board wants to talk about. On there, I don't know, if we have to necessarily go into that. We talked, there's again, some general, some specific recommendations about the improvements on Broad Street, moving inlets, providing details and whatnot. Again, they're going to comply with that unless there's something the board needs to talk about. I don't know if there's anything that we have to particularly go into detail on. Some other issues, questions here about grading and whatnot. The stormwater system, again, there's a whole lengthy section in here about their compliance, whether or not compliance with the stormwater. Ultimately, they have to present a fully compliant plan on the stormwater, because we don't have any ability to grant relief from stormwater. So they're indicating they're going to do that. That's part of their, I guess, resubmission of the plan. Again, this whole stormwater section on quantity, quality, groundwater recharge standards. That's outlined in here. Again, they're indicating they're gonna comply. They're gonna have to provide documentation showing how they're complying. Because that's what the whole, basically, the whole rest of this report is focusing on. A lot of, again, issues related to ultimately where they have to present in a way of operation and maintenance manuals, recording, documentation, things of that nature. A whole bunch of questions about how the calculations were prepared and some inconsistencies, which are going to have to address. Lighting and landscaping, I deferred to Beth. Utilities, you heard a verbal response here that they're going to be able to get a will serve letter from the borough, which the board needs that, obviously, and they need something in writing, obviously, to know what specifically what the borough is saying on the water and sewer. And then you have the outside agency approvals, which I don't even recall where we stand with that, but we can defer that to the end of the discussion.
Okay. All right, so having gone through that, we'll move to questions from members of the board. If I could ask, can you stop sharing the graphic just for a second? It's a little bit easier for me to see the remote because thanks. Questions on the engineering testimony from members of the board. I'm gonna look online first. Dennis, Anna, Jim, Mike. Dennis has got a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I had a couple. One on the parking. With the original proposal, how many spaces were on the ground floor of the building that are now eliminated because there's more apartments?
Don't remember exactly. I believe the number was around 24, somewhere like mid-20s.
Okay, so
I
it's
don't
not,
have the list with me to.
okay. And then another question, is a separate driveway required to Broad Street? Is that a requirement?
I'm not sure what you mean by requirement by ordinance.
There's an exit on Church, right? The normal one, but what is on here is also going to have entrance and an exit onto Broad. And I was just asking, is that a town requirement?
I don't know if it's a ordinance requirement per se. I mean, it's certainly, I mean, the way things are written, it might actually be, the interconnectivity between lots. Is something that's always pushed by the borough. So whether or not it's actually a technical requirement, I don't know that it is.
I don't believe that's a requirement. There are requirements for connecting to adjacent properties where practical, but connecting through another property to an approximate road is not a requirement.
Thank you. And then my last question, I understood the conversation about trying to get tenants where they don't park on property that's not part of this, this lot. I'm asking on the other way, because I know American Car and Tire, they park a lot on the other side of the island which is where the building would go. I know there's always a lot of cars there just from past experience. Are they on their own then? Because I know they use that currently.
They're not allowed to park their vehicles on our site either, and that will be an enforcement issue between the property owners. It's always an enforcement issue between the property owners, but right now there will be a building there instead of that parking, so it won't be able to take place.
Great, thank you.
Any of the other remote folks have questions on the testimony? No. No, good. Karen?
Yes,
Go ahead.
sorry, I'm way cognizant of the time.
I'm well aware of the
What's
time.
you,
It is
Amy?
9:43. I'm aiming to follow our
Seems
bylaws.
to go fast with that stand, I'll say. And forgive me if I jump around because I just made notes as we were going. One of my questions relates to one of Dennis's, really, I think. The way I wrote it was slightly different. The access to Broad. Several times in your testimony, you mentioned that it was suggested by this board previously. Can you tell me what you mean by that? Because I was on that meeting and I don't remember it being suggested that we said somebody had to create an access to Broad.
I think Mr. Grunberg had made some comments that.
You know what, I think I meant, I wasn't here, you were here, and it was my understanding because, and I could be very wrong, that interconnection that was to be reserved to the other lot was to provide the benefit to Broad. If that wasn't specifically said to Broad and it was meant to be interconnection, that would be my fault only because I wasn't here.
Right, and I'm
But-
only raising it because it's been raised as a supporting argument for this access on Broad, in my humble opinion from your testimony. So my question, I think what you're suggesting is we were maybe suggesting keep that access open in the plan if you ever could get access. Is that
Correct.
what you're saying there in your
Correct.
testimony?
I think that would be a benefit, but
I think that.
Yeah, we
That
have,
may be how it was suggested by the board. I just want it on the record that the board did not say that we suggest this site would be improved by having an access. I don't think we ever said that. I don't remember the date, but I'm just trying to get that understood for everyone's edification on this. Because I think that's important because you've raised it as in your testimony several times.
well, and
That it was came from us, and I don't think that's important to say, we did not say you had to have an access on board, because there were various questions with the access on board.
no, I don't know that I had said that the board said we needed to have access on the Broad,
I
that,
think-
you know, the borough. The ordinance certainly. Very strongly encourages and requires in a lot of cases, the interconnection between the lots, and so all those
Right.
interconnections are all there. It's my opinion, and should be my testimony that the connection to Broad is a benefit to the overall development, though, as it provides better access into and out of the site.
Right, and that's your testimony, I hear you. The questions I have on it are, it was mentioned again on, I've got two ways to ask these different things. I've got parking issues and then I've got traffic issues related to that. So, you raised in your testimony, information from the Union Hotel and used that to explain numbers. When you've used that information, did you consider that the proportion of retail to residential was different in that project than this? So that those numbers don't really apply.
No, I don't
The
think that.
proportions between, because it's the shared, you were talking about the shared parking and it was bringing down your
These-
effective to 151 at peak demand.
So-
So I question whether we can use those union ones on this site because it's different.
So, be clear, the 151 shared parking is specific to this site. Based
Right,
on
but
what was
you-
done last time. I used
You used
the
the
Union, yes, I did use the Union Hotel one, and I used the Union Hotel one. Those are based on generation rates. Based on the number of units. It has nothing to do with the proportion of units within there. It has to do with the type of unit. just because you have more retail than you would have apartments, doesn't mean you don't have those apartments and they don't have a similar generation.
Right.
And you didn't factor in the shared parking analysis using the Union Hotel ordinance.
Right, that was just on the bulk generation rate for the residential
Right.
that I was using, because again,
Okay,
what
that
I'm-
doesn't come from your testimony, didn't say that specific thing, so I appreciate you adding that in.
okay,
Using the Union Hotel also on the same vein, if it was gonna come any question. The Union Hotel has access to several public parking lots quite close by. This area does not.
and they
So
use those
that-
parking lots for their compliance.
This is used for their complaints. You can't use public parking
And I'm
lots
not-
for your complaints because we don't have them.
And I'm
Yeah,
not-
I know, but your peak demand is suggesting 151, and whereas this is saying we need to provide 256, which would therefore suggest we're almost 100 lower, I mean, than is required. You stated in your testimony, did you not, that your peak demand parking was 151,
Right,
which is 100, nearly 100 different from 256. Where are the other 100 cars gonna go? Because we need them.
No, what the testimony is, the 151
Mhm.
is the demand. What would be needed, how many cars we would need to park on the site peak. Based on that analysis, the peak demand that we would need is 151 parking spaces. Where we're providing 206. The way your ordinance would calculate it, we'd be required, down to EV credits, we'd be required to have 256. That's what your ordinance would say would be necessary. And so the point I was making was, we did a shared parking analysis that said that the 256 number, or even the 236 number, is still greater than the demand that we have based on that shared parking analysis, where the peak demand would be 151. And in an effort to give some context to the board and some understanding of why a number that is significantly less than what your standard would say, because again, yes, it is 100 less than your standard. To give you some context, was to look to the Union Hotel standard that the borough set. And to show you how, yes, these are more appropriate numbers for parking for this type of use.
Right. I appreciate that, clarification on the demand, but then I just still want to come back to the total number of parking spaces required. Notwithstanding what you just said, and following on from Mr. Clerico, we are required 256, and your 206
We're
is still
required
231.
231.
231 from this, is this A4?
Yeah.
231. 206, so we're down 31. Even we do that.
It's-
But
it's
as you
25
discussed with Mr. Clerico, light with light from the previous submission, we're down 50. I want to know still where those cars are going to go, unless you're going to restrict each unit to having only one vehicle. Is that?
No, we don't, so
Going to
the
happen?
thing is, we don't need to restrict the units, the actual. It's not where those cars are gonna go, those cars aren't going to exist. Based upon,
Right,
based
wait.
upon,
How are they not going to exist if we have 113 units? And how are we not going to, the car's not going to exist?
because
Because if we only provide 206 spaces for 113 units, or if we only provide 151, that's 1.3 per unit, but the required is up to 2 spaces per unit. So who's not going to get a vehicle? And where is that vehicle going to?
the requirement is based on the RSIS standard, which is from 96. Approximately, which are based on studies from probably the 80s. And have been consistently shown to be more parking than is required. And especially with this type of use. The parking demand was based upon the IT's generation numbers, which are more current and up to date. The boroughs, and again, I keep using the Union Hotel ordinance because it's more current and it's reflective of more real world conditions of what actual demand is for units like this. I mean,
Well, we don't know what the actual demand for the Union Hotel is yet, so we can't confirm that because it's not completed. So I'm not minded to use that yet until it's completed and we see how it really impacts the
But
town,
it's-
right? So I'm going off what is on your drawing and what our ordinance requires, yeah? So where seriously, we know that people these days don't have one car per unit. Most people have multiple cars as our ordinance requirements reflects. So if.
I think that's
Let's keep it to questions.
I know you're trying. The question is, where are the cars going to park? Because if this project is successful and all 113 units are full, there's going to be more that our ordinance says, there's going to be 206 vehicles. Or 231.
I think, it's a supposition that everybody has two vehicles and that is not, that is not true. The general standard that gets bandied about on this type of use is 1.5 spaces per unit is a pretty fair number that gets used in this county and more urban counties for most redevelopment and any time a town is making an ordinance and putting in a specific requirement, 1.5 ends up being the standard that everybody agrees is more appropriate. So a standard that says 2 is over parking your site unnecessarily. And again, it's not where these cars are going to go. It's your ordinance would require more parking than is necessary for the use. And irrespective of the Union Hotel standard, which again, I'm trying to introduce as context for you to understand what's appropriate. The shared parking is based upon studies that had been performed of sites like this and of what their actual demand is. And it's based on older ones. And as Mr. Troutman put in his report, and I don't want to necessarily put you on the spot in any way, but that as more studies have been done and newer versions of the script generation manuals have been put into place, that the demand has gone down for this use, for multifamily use.
All right, I said there was 2 aspects to it. The traffic study aspect of this access on Broad 2, I have concerns with. I have to want to ask you, you said it was a benefit in your testimony to have this. And I think this is a double question for you and Jay probably. The trip movement that's involved tends to just focus on the trip movement within the site. Was the trip movement with the lights so for Broad and I can't remember the street. Church. Was that included? Because was the
Your
concerns
analysis
for
of the
traffic
light?
light at that location?
No, there was no analysis of the light at that location.
We don't know the trip movement increase. Was there any consideration of the fact that we create a cut through that people might use to avoid that light?
You mean coming through the site and then
People
going?
use it as a nice little avoid the red light.
To be honest, the movements you need to make to get through there,
No, it's still great.
you're not gonna say that light doesn't cycle that long. I mean, I've gone through there how many hundreds of times, and you're not waiting on that light long enough that going through the site is gonna save you any time.
No. Note 4 on this drawing mentions no tractor trailers will be allowed on the site.
Yeah.
Have you spoken to the fire service department about what they need to bring onto the site? Is that a huge concern at MLS?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We spoke to them on the last one. and they were satisfied with what we had provided last time. The movements into the site in between the buildings that they had required remain unchanged. And if anything, this access off of Broad provides them an additional easier way to come into the site and to get to the rear. Where right now they can't get into that area as easily, so it actually improves. This plan over the prior plan, and sorry, I'm pointing to my board.
It's not the history with the, are they okay with the speed bumps too? Can you just speak to that?
I haven't asked them about the speed bumps.
Okay.
Speed bumps, usually the only problem you have with that is, it's towns don't want them because it's a maintenance issue when plows come through, but it's his problem. It's not the borough's problem.
I'll make the fire service.
I mean, those trucks, if those trucks can't make it over the speed bumps that people's on the.
No, I know, we introduced it since the last they saw the plan, I thought.
Yeah.
Coming back to the testimony that you gave in response to Mr. Dennis's question. I don't quite think you got the idea of maybe Dennis can confirm if you misunderstood his question, but you were suggesting that you would to snake past the house. He was asking if how many spaces were lost if we didn't.
If we did.
And your sorry, I'm getting to a point. Your testimony mentioned sneaking past and there wouldn't be room for a two-way road. I think Dennis's question, and that's certainly one that I was going to ask, is if you didn't demolish the house at all and didn't have the access to Broad, how many spaces would you lose? Is it about 6? Like if your parking lot just extended up to the back of that house? Because we're already deficient on spaces anyway, so losing 6 more by deficiency wouldn't be too much of a problem.
I don't know the number. And.
Could we provide that next time?
Well, here.
Because we don't have the house.
Yeah, it's at least,
difficult to say.
it's at least 14. And
Well,
that
that's a
leaves,
small lot, isn't it? Or is that
no,
for the house?
no, that's just for the house.
Okay.
It'd be 14.
Oh, it's on.
And again, that leaves you now with a house that is not in good condition, that has a demo permit.
Well, I'm not
And
speaking to
and there's no. I mean, from a practical standpoint, leaving the house would serve, there's no yard now for that house. It's a very.
Well,
peculiar
not everybody
situation.
has a yard, so that's not for us to decide here. It's just quite, the question was how many parking spaces. It's been mentioned by Mr. Clerical, the adjacent businesses. I do have concerns on that. I'd like you to speak to. It just struck me now. I don't know why looking at the map, but on this A4, the parking spots that are on the bottom edge of your building 3, those belong to the bank, yes? So those are the bank spots. They're not your spots. Is that
On the very
correct?
bottom of the page, yes.
Yeah, okay.
And they're not counted towards any of our parking.
No, I know they're not counted. It's just visually when you look at it, you imagine that they're part of the thing. Have you done any negotiation with those businesses and spoken to them? I've heard testimony about just putting signs up and telling them they can't park, but is there any sort of discussion and negotiation going on with them? As regards the you said they're going to lose spaces, but also
They're not losing any
possibility-
spaces.
They're losing things that they're using illegally right now. I accept that.
Well, I mean, that's not really losing.
Not correctly, but the possibility of anybody from your project parking on their spaces. I'm just wondering, I'm just asking if the discussion has been had with those businesses and if anything could be negotiated at all.
No, they haven't.
No? Okay. All right.
Okay. Take.
Yeah, because I kind of jumped around in my notes. You mentioned the restriction by permits. Okay, no, that covers all my questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Do you have any questions?
I just saw probable 30-minute parking sign like your temporary parking. I think you mentioned 15 minutes in your testimony.
Okay, yeah, I might have had the number one.
Okay,
Yes, 30.
that's all I had, is clarification.
Gotcha.
So is it 30 or 15? The plan says 30.
If the plan says 30, it's 30.
Okay.
Okay.
Kara asks for those kinds of clarifications. Okay. I just have a couple of clarifying questions, and then we've got questions from members of the public. Just make sure I understand your testimony. On the parking. To come back to parking. Would I be correct in characterizing your testimony that our ordinance, which relies on 25-plus-year-old RSIS standards, relying on 35-plus-year-old studies, is perhaps outdated and resulting in way too much parking being built than we actually need?
Yes.
Your testimony is that for the using more current data of actual trip generation, of demand for parking based on units, more contemporary studies says that you are providing adequate parking for your intended residential.
That's correct.
Yes. Okay. That's all I'm asking. All right, just make sure I got that. Okay. All right, so we will go to questions from members of the public. If you wouldn't mind stop sharing for just a second so I can see if there's anybody online. Anyone online with a question, if you want to raise your hand? Not seeing it. Okay, any members of the public here with questions for the engineer? Again, if you could just come forward and identify yourself.
You end at 10?
I'm sorry?
End at 10?
And what's it?
End at 10.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, we don't end at 10, but we generally don't do new testimony after 10:30 if we can. We're definitely not going to start a new witness at that point. And given the complexity of what I anticipate the architectural testimony to be, we're not going to add the architect after we're done with questions here. Yeah, you should.
I'll take the blame on that.
No blame.
Again, my name is John Kaplan. I'm an attorney at the Herald Law Firm in Warren Township, New Jersey, here on behalf of 114 Broad Street LLC. Questions regarding your testimony. Now, the new building, the phase 2 building, that is or is not the same footprint.
It's not.
It's a little larger.
It is.
By how much?
I don't remember offhand.
No idea. Okay.
I'm not gonna guess at it.
And regard to parking. You follow me on this. So there's approximately 24 parking spots in the previous approval on the first floor. Give or take, exact numbers aren't.
Yeah, I don't have the prior plan on it to say, but it was, in my recollection, it was about 24.
So if there's 24 parking spaces, if you were to eliminate the 13 units, what would your parking numbers be as far as compliance with the ordinance?
I don't understand what one has to do with the other.
Well, if you eliminated 13 units and kept the 24 parking spaces, added the current spaces you're adding, what would your parking count be, and would that be compliant with the ordinance?
I don't know.
You don't know? Can we add some numbers? Correct some numbers?
I mean, you're making a supposition that we can just pull 13 units out of the building and put 24 parking spaces in their spot, and I'm not the architect, and I can't say that that fits within the way this plan is laid out, so I'm not comfortable answering that question.
Well, I'm not asking you to redesign the building, I'm just asking parking
Okay.
numbers. If you were to keep the same old building, the same previous approval, with the same approximately 24 parking spots, what would your parking count be with the new parking spaces added? And would you be compliant with the parking requirement for the ordinance.
You're saying if we kept the old approval
Correct.
and then we added this additional parking,
Correct.
not what's before the board, would we comply? We would like to comply, yes.
And what would that do to your floor area ratio with the elimination of 13 units?
Should we change it?
Be more compliant?
If you were a floor area, then yes.
And I know we haven't really decided impervious surface coverage.
I think we've decided enough to know that it's compliant with the ordinance.
Okay, so getting back to that, complying with the ordinances to impervious surface coverage. The difference between 50% and 70%.
It's 20%.
And you said that was a penalty? Or is it actually, you're given an extra 20%
No,
coverage?
it's a penalty. The front table listed at 70%. And the ordinance says if you cannot provide the green infrastructure things that are in the ordinance, then there's a 20% penalty to the property.
Okay. Now, we spoke about the Union Hotel a little bit. Member of the board asked you, there's a difference between the Union Hotel and this property. So there's a different ratio between retail and that property, this property. And you said an apartment's an apartment, correct? A unit's a unit?
I said, at the end of the day, the residential uses between the two are similar to the point where their parking generation would be the same.
So in your experience as an engineer in parking, it doesn't matter if that apartments in an urban area, in a rural area.
Well, that's why I draw the conclusion to the Union Hotel, because it's a block and a half away. And so it's in the same area. It's a standard for something in the same borough. In the same area. So does it make a difference if that unit is in New York City and in Hunterdon County? Certainly does. But the standard that's being drawn is between something that's less than a mile apart.
Okay, you said, testified that it's more appropriate. I believe the word was to use the standard set for the Union Hotel, correct?
Yes,
And a number of times you said it's a real world standard.
yes.
So if the township set those parking requirements, obviously you can't impute knowledge on the council. Why haven't they amended the ordinance for parking requirements if that's the real world?
I'm just gonna
Well,
object to that question.
I don't think it's in his ability to testify to the whims of our borough council. And if you know anything about our borough council and how long it takes to get ordinances updated, you know the answer to the question before you ask. So we can move on. Yeah.
Understandable. And you testified. Farthest parking spots at building 2 is 550 feet or 650 feet, building 3 is 550 feet. Just for the record, do you know the distance between the buildings and the closest parking spot at 114 Broad Street?
With or without the fence.
Without the fence, with the fence distance.
And then a federal straight line that avoids the building. Probably about 350 feet.
Okay. And with regard to the building on that property, testify that there's no windows in the back?
Yeah.
And you've been to the property?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, with regard to trees, I believe you said You were 19 deficient when we found spots for 3 more.
We were,
Are those numbers wrong?
yeah, you know, we were 6 deficient and we found 3 more, so we're only half as deficient.
Now, are there currently trees between the new western parking lot and the building on 114?
There are a number of trees.
And those are proposed to stay?
The ones that aren't dead ash trees, that are hanging over your client's building. That would be a favor to remove them so they don't crush it. Yeah, the live ones. So far as they're able to stay,
Is there a retaining wall on that edge?
there is a retaining wall.
Will the retaining wall kill those trees?
I'd have to look at it.
If those trees did die, would the applicant be willing to replace them?
I mean, like I said, most of them are dead anyway.
The live ones.
Would have been a better question for him. I can't answer that.
Well, is he going to testify about retaining walls killing trees?
He would testify about replacing anything that were to die. I mean, if they're his trees, then that's his prerogative.
Now, as far as access to Broad Street, then there's board members' question about being cut through. And so you sat that light a number of times, it's not gonna be cut through. How long is that light?
I don't know. But I know I've never sat there. Well, I'm speaking from experience and not based on calculations. That light doesn't have such a long cycle time that I've ever sat there and thought I wish there was a better way to get around it.
Okay, the applicant submitted a title report for their application, correct?
We did
And you reviewed that title report?
a while ago.
So then working.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Sorry.
I was speaking. So.
Okay, just reviewing my notes, I don't want to double up on questions. The parking spots. Did we go over the dimensions of those?
I don't believe we did.
And what are the dimensions of the parking spots? Are they all uniform?
Well, they're all 9 by 18 unless it's a accessible stall.
Okay. And how many accessible stalls do we have?
Eight.
8. And we talked about dedicating parking spots. Is there any dedicated parking spaces for employees that are town?
No,
Any designated visitor parking spots?
no,
Prospective residents?
nope.
All those prospective residents, visitors, it's all included in your traffic or parking calculations?
Certainly is.
If you were to have a parking issue for whatever reason, and there was overflow, you know where those cars would park?
As a hypothetical that I'm not gonna speculate on.
Is there any on the street parking?
No, not on Church, certainly. I don't know if there's parking on Broad in that area. I can't remember.
Are there any municipal lots around?
I mean, not adjacent to the site.
Any idea how close? And you testified that the fire department okayed everything last time, and this time it's better because the access to Broad. Is the same hold true for garbage collection?
Yep.
And the garbage trucks can have access to the dumpster between those two buildings?
That's, we have those turning movements shown in the plans. Yes,
And what about snow? Where's the snow gonna go when you plow it?
that's really a site maintenance issue that we should have asked of the applicant, how he would plan on handling it. I don't know if he plans on having it recorded. But that is. That's an issue for him.
And obviously this is a residential building, so it's more or less a 24-hour operation. The lights in the parking lot, this can be on 24 hours a day
Yes,
at full power or security lighting.
I don't think we've discussed. Or in the prior application, discussed reducing the intensity at any point in time. So. I would assume that they would be on as they are.
And you're seeking a design waiver to keep those lights as is. You're not downward facing or,
Yes,
okay, so they're not downward facing and they're gonna be on all day, all night.
hopefully not all day.
Yeah,
yes, all
obviously
day.
not all day, right now. All night. And do you know how many trees you'll be losing? When you demolish building on lot 4 and go through?
No,
No,
more than 2.
more than 2. And there's no room to put additional trees between 114 and the new lot?
With the wall and then the addition of a fence. No,
Now, would that require a variance or a design waiver?
with what?
Are trees required along that
No,
parking lot, no? Okay. That's it, let's see it, thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public with questions? Dennis, you're not a member of the public, you're a member of the board. You raise your hand to give a follow-up question. Dennis, you, again, I'm gonna let you get Dennis.
Sorry, I just wanted to mention, there is access from Route
No,
31.
no, you can't give testimony, you can ask a question. We'll have
Yeah,
time.
so the question on people potentially driving through the site. Are you concerned where you can access the site from Route 31 behind the American Car and Tire site and go to Broad Street? You'd avoid 2 lights.
I gotta be honest, that the access behind the old pharmacy is, despite the fact that the borough police like to sit there, it's not the most well advertised thing, and I think might some people, everybody here know about it?
Now we can do.
Yeah. Yeah. I think everybody here now knows about it, but I don't think it's something that, you know, that entrance. Isn't, like I said, isn't very well advertised, and I don't think anybody really realizes too well that it connects. I mean, you certainly do.
Yeah, the only thing, my only question would be, it's not important now, but if there is a through street to Broad Street, it might be important for people. That's all I have.
All right, thanks, Dennis. All right, any other questions, from members of the public? Okay, so thank you for your testimony, and we're gonna see you again, 20, but as it is 10:22, I would suggest we don't call up and witness.
They're dying to testify.
I understand, and I would suggest, if we could carry this forward to our next meeting. Well, can we carry to May 9th, or do we need is your witness is gonna be available?
Can you do May 9th? Okay, yeah, May 9th. May 9th, we're good.
Okay, so we are going to carry this matter to May 9th, 2023 in this room, 7 p.m. No further notice given.
7 p.m.
7 p.m. Did I say something different?
Seven.
Seven. It's 7. It's definitely 7.
Maybe I heard-
Zero.
But I'd say that.
Beth is out. Will you be able to provide someone to sit in your chair?
Yes, I can.
All right. Okay. All right, so this matter is carried to May 9th. Thank you for the testimony so far this evening. Item 11 on our agenda, executive session. We need to go to executive session. We do not. Going to get a motion to adjourn.
Second, John.
There you go. No.
Yeah.
It's probably.
Something.
Yes.